Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is story about what if Tsunade kidnaps Naruto part 1. Before I start, please do support for more amazing content and comments for part 2. Do consider to subscribe my channel and share my video to your friends and check out the description as well. Let's start the video. Hey Jiraiya-sensei? What's a good gift for Auntie Tsunade? A young male's voice interrupted the peaceful atmosphere that had settled long ago in the area. The older male turned his head to glance at his student, slightly surprised to hear the boy show interest in something that wasn't shinobi related. Why are you asking Naruto? It was indeed something to take note of, considering the boy wasn't exactly normal. The teen preferred to remain in isolation and loved silence. He wasn't much of a talker and generally only participated in social activities if it was, in his words, logical. The blonde possessed similar idealisms to that of the Aburame in Konoha. Considering his upbringing, it wasn't all that surprising. He was emotionally stunted due to the treatment by the populace in Konoha. Hiruzen had tried all he could, but he was only one man. Kami rest his soul. The young teen glanced towards his teacher with a blank face before tilting his head slightly. Is it not the appropriate gesture when you wish to show gratitude on one's birthday? After all, it is what you would do for me. It was slightly unnerving being under the stare of the boy. But the older male had grown used to it over the years. Well, yes. But I was more interested in why you wished to give her a gift. Not that there's anything wrong with it. Jiraiya shrugged his shoulders lightly after his statement. His student turned away from him and stared out into the empty field with that same emotionless gaze. Is it not logical of me to give her a gift? She is the only person aside from yourself to show genuine care for me. The older male sighed at the 16-year-old statement. It was true for the most part. Jiraiya would visit Naruto on his birthday every year to make sure he had the essentials. The boy didn't have friends because he preferred to be alone. When the boy was 10 or so, Jiraiya suspected that he was a little on the spectrum, his teammate only being able to confirm this in private. Tsunade had showed genuine kindness and a far more gentler side to the young boy when she had met him. Though she had left Konoha of her own volition, she was still loyal through and through. The older woman discovering she had an actual living family member was what truly enticed her return to take the mantle of the 5th Hokage. Tsunade finding out about Naruto's condition and his treatment had struck a fire in her that he hadn't seen since Dan's death. Jiraiya had feared for even his own safety following the woman's wrath. She could be quite vengeful when she needed to be. Jiraiya shook his head slightly and responded to his student's question. Well, maybe some sake? The older male had a small grin at that. Auntie Tsunade drinks too much to begin with. It is unhealthy. She has the ability to cleanse and purge the after effects of consuming such large quantities, but it doesn't mean it's logical to do so. The boy's face remained blank, but the older male could see the glimpse of annoyance in his student's eyes. Why do you care so much? A little crush, perhaps? A sly grin morphed on his face. The boy's face turned towards the man with a raised eyebrow. She would be far more interested in a younger man than one who has vacated his prime. The statement was so blunt that Jiraiya could feel it smack him in his face. Literally, Jiraiya's eyebrow twitched following his student's statement. You little shit. I'm only 45 years old. If you haven't noticed, Tsunade is the same age as me. The young man gave a light shrug and retorted. Yes, but she is still in her prime and will remain that way until her early 60s. Auntie Tsunade is Uzumaki and Senju born. The boy then leaned against the tree he sat in front of and closed his eyes, continuing on. She may be 45, but the combined genetics of those two clans puts her at mid-20s. You and I both know very well that her excuse of using a genjutsu to hide her age is just that. An excuse. It is impossible to have such finite control of one's chakra to pull off such a feat 24/7. The Toad Sage was annoyed that every single word that was being said was entirely true. Why does the brat feel the need to attack his age? Also, I did not mean to offend you. I was merely stating facts. Yes. Well, most people do not wish to hear such things. The boy furrowed his eyebrows with genuine confusion. Why is that? Why would anyone wish to hear the opposite of the truth? The older male just sighed as he remembered just who in fact he was talking to. A prodigy of all things shinobi related but completely oblivious to all things normally human related. A conundrum if he ever saw one. Because Naruto, some things that are truthful can actually be detrimental. Jiraiya began to scribble in his notepad as he knew that Naruto would begin asking questions, the truth being a detriment? How is that logical? Jiraiya sat silent for several seconds, wondering how he should approach the subject. His young student was eyeing him with a mixture of curiosity and confusion. The only emotions the boy seemed to ever really show. Got it, he snapped his fingers. Say you wish to give Tsunade a compliment. How would you do so? The man stared at his student with a smile. Naruto blinked before responding. I would tell her that she is both powerful and beautiful. His sensei nodded before continuing on. Now, what are things that you dislike about Tsunade and how would you tell her? The older male immediately held his hands up in defense at Naruto's piercing stare. No jokes this time. I'm being serious. The young male nodded slightly before narrowing his eyes. I would tell her that her frequent use of alcohol is slightly barbaric. Jiraiya snapped his finger following the boy's answer. That is something you would not verbally tell Tsunade. He could tell that he was getting through to the boy now. But why not? Alcohol is a detriment to her health. The blonde had his head tilted slightly with a vexed expression on his face, because Tsunade knows her limits. Alcohol is a detriment to anyone besides Jinchurikis and that woman. Her body actually purges the toxins in the alcohol faster than they can affect her. Tsunade just chooses to block it. He gave a slight shrug afterwards. I don't understand. Jiraiya gave a small smile at that and responded. It's due to the fact that Tsunade enjoys the feeling of it. Alcohol will never truly harm the woman. It's physically impossible. I assume she dramatizes her drunkenness to get you and Shizen annoyed. Naruto adopted a frown for a slight moment before shrugging. If it makes her happy, I will continue to indulge in her little game. A shrug following suit. A comfortable silence sat in the clearing after the boy's statement. Jiraiya glanced at his student for a small moment. Despite his earlier tease, the boy might actually have an infatuation with the woman. It would make sense. Naruto may not understand basic human emotions, but he indeed had them. It wouldn't be a stretch to believe he had a crush on the woman. It's not like there were any other women that the Jinchuriki would frequently speak with. Kakashi had informed him of the dynamics of Team 7. Which weren't that great to begin with. A young man with a heart full of vengeance, a young woman that didn't understand the true intricacies of being a kunoichi, and another young man who lacked basic human sympathy and empathy. A clusterfuck was the first thing to come to mind. Jiraiya and Naruto were on this 3-year trip due to the event of his teammates' choices regarding the village. Sasuke Uchiha had abandoned Konoha in favor of power. Tsunade had delegated Shikamaru Nara, Niji Hyuga, Kiba Inuzuka, Choji Akimichu, Rock Lee, and Naruto Uzumaki to track the boy down and bring the Uchiha back alive. The mission was a success but a catastrophe of epic proportions. 3 young men ended up in critical condition and the target Sasuke Uchiha was killed by Naruto. Jiraiya had no idea what actually happened. Every time he asked the boy, he would get ignored or the subject would change. The only individual who knew the information was Tsunade herself. The 5th Hokage refused to speak about it. While a tracking team was sent to retrieve the young boys after their fights, Naruto arrived at the gates later that day with a dead Sasuke over his shoulders. He had simply stated that I failed the mission parameters. The last loyal Uchiha was dead and by the hands of the village's own Jinchuriki no less. Every shinobi was of similar mind regarding the situation. Sasuke had betrayed the leaf and he was disposed of. It was unfortunate, but that was just shinobi life. The young Jinchuriki did not seem bothered by any of it. He had took everything in stride. The young male had been berated by his female teammate before brushing past her to see if his squad was alive. Kiba, Niji, and Choji would recover and eventually find out what happened following their fights. They weren't that surprised at the outcome of Naruto and Sasuke's battle. The entire team comprised of Genins and one Chunin knew just how strong Naruto could be. The Uchiha liked to pride himself on his combat abilities, but when Naruto decided to take his gloves off, the fight would generally end. Jiraiya had sprung the boy with him due to the fact that Itachi would catch wind of this. The boogeyman of the Uchiha was a man you didn't typically cross. Regardless of what Jiraiya knew of the young prodigy, he knew for certain that Itachi would be displeased. Whether that be in Konoha or Naruto was up for debate. After all, with Danzo's death occurring, many secrets had leaked out. None of them were good either. Jiraiya was glad that Tsunade had ended that sick fuck's life. When she activated her seal, that fight was over regardless of how many Sharingans that monster possessed. The goal of the man to push for the Uchiha's annihilation as well as using Itachi Uchiha to commit such a heinous act. The Reaper would no doubt wish to speak with the source of his little brother's subsequent death. It was a big reason why the Toad Sage had convinced Tsunade to let him take the boy. Even if the situation was explained about Danzo's treachery, Jiraiya was uncertain about Itachi's course of action. It was better to be safe than sorry. The Akatsuki was another problem. A group of S-rank rogue shinobi united under a single banner. For what reason? The war veteran was uncertain. But it most likely had to deal with Jinchurikis. Anything regarding the Bijus was dangerous. If that group was actively targeting the host for the Bijus, then it was nothing but trouble. This trip would be over in a couple of months anyway. Tsunade was getting antsy. Her monthly messages that she would send regarding the progress, and Naruto himself, were beginning to double. He assumed they would triple when they got nearer to the date that they would return. The older man shook his head slightly before making his way to his feet. Come on, kid. We gotta make it to Kumo before sundown. The young man just nodded his head before following his sensei's actions. Kumo was an interesting village to say the least. Many clouds hovered due to the mountainous region. The general vibe was always stern if Jiraiya had to put a finger on it. It was the most militaristic major village, so it would make sense. Stick close. Don't need you offending anyone and everyone you meet. Especially in Kumo of all places. The sage told his student. If they are offended by the truth, then Kami smite me. What a world we live in where being right is wrong. The young male shook his head slightly and stuck his hands into his pockets. Jiraiya just sighed at the statement before continuing to the checkpoint that would allow them access to the village. Halt! A voice yelled out before the duo even made it to the checkpoint. Jiraiya had sensed them before they appeared, and judging by his student's lack of response, he did as well. A jonin from Kumo made his way to the duo. You are Jiraiya of the Sannin, yes? The man was glaring at the both of them as if they had done some world-ending action and brought destruction to the world. Jiraiya thought the man needed to get laid. Last I checked, I am indeed Jiraiya of the Sannin. Naruto could hear the snark in his sensei's voice. Seems he was genuinely annoyed about being stopped so close to the actual village. The young male just closed his eyes, uncaring of the entire situation. The man just seemed to glare harder at the statement, and what he assumed was disrespect from the blonde. His glare deepened, and he focused his attention on the young Jinchuriki. And you are? The scroll's information did not mention a boy tagging along. There was no mistaking the mocking tone in the man's voice. Naruto Uzumaki. The young male responded but didn't open his eyes. This man didn't bother him. He wasn't strong enough to pose a threat, nor was he threatening enough for the blonde to care. The Kumo jonin narrowed his eyes at the boy before sneering. Leave, boy. Else I make you do so. Jiraiya was half tempted to scream in frustration. This man was going to end up becoming roadkill. They'd have a national incident on their hands. You do not have the power nor tact to demand such things from me. You do not even know me. You are weak. You will always be weak. If you think you can force me to leave, then you are welcome to do so. Naruto raised his hands to his sides. The boy's eyes opened, if only slightly, to view the man who dare order him around. Jiraiya definitely wanted to scream in anger now. The man not only disrespected the blonde but disregarded him. It was two of the three things you didn't do. The sage would need to defuse the situation before it could get worse. You little shit! The jonin's chakra spiked and a slight pressure spread through the surrounding, which only attracted the attention of nearby shinobi and Kumo's own version of the NBU. Naruto's eyes opened to reveal his sapphire-colored pupils before glancing towards his teacher. In that brief moment, a conversation was struck between the two. Jiraiya tried to stop the boy, but he was too late. Naruto's chakra bombarded the area. The very ground he stood on cratered before exploding. Huge amounts of dirt, dust, and earth rocketed from his position. The pressure from the boy's release of chakra caused the jonin to blast away from the Jinchuriki. Jiraiya's shoulders sagged slightly due to the pressure. Having been on the receiving end for the past 2.5 years, this was nothing new to the man. But it was going to cause trouble. Many of the shinobi were frozen from the raw display of chakra that the young man possessed. Some of the weaker nins in the area even being forced to their knees after the display. A woman with blonde hair who was resting against a tree tense before her eyes snapped open due to the raw amount of chakra. Her head turned towards the entrance of the village and a smirk framed her beautiful face. Wahoo! Now that's a lot of chakra. I can sense even more. Shall we go play Matatabi? The young woman asked to seemingly noon. She disappeared in a burst of speed to where she felt the chakra spike. Atop a mountain was a dark-skinned man with several blades in his hand and other various areas of his body. The man was twirling the blades in his possession in a symphony of agile and interesting moves that resembled breakdancing. He suddenly stopped and his head turned towards the direction of the village's gates, and a smirk appeared on his face. Seems Mr. Nine has come to shine, eh? He sheathed all 7 of his blades before he too disappeared in a burst of speed towards the Kyubi Jinchuriki. The 4th Reikage was seated at his desk with his eyes closed before they suddenly snapped opened. He could sense the incredible amount of chakra just outside his gates. His first thought was that B or Yujito were causing it, but he didn't recognize this individual's signature. The muscular man sighed slightly as he sensed both Jinchurikis of Kumo rushing to the gates. The man had a meeting with Jiraiya of the Sannin later on, and this situation was just going to annoy the man. I removed his hat before calling out to his secretary. Mabui! I'm going to investigate that source of chakra. A slight crack of electricity coated his body before he seemingly vanished from the room. His secretary entering a second later in annoyance. The 4th Reikage landed slightly at the entrance to the front gates of his village, his cloak of electricity vanishing as soon as he touched the ground. The dark-skinned man immediately focused on the crater and the 2 males that stood side by side. He recognized Jiraiya of the Sannin, and the other. That boy looked far too familiar. His eyes glanced to the Toad Sage before going back to the teen. Blonde, spiky hair, thin frame, blue eyes, yes. This boy was definitely his child. There was no other explanation. The Reikage then glanced around at all his shinobi in the area. He had noticed the gigantic crater that stemmed from the young teen. It wasn't hard to guess that this boy, who was also his child, was the Kyubi Jinchuriki. The boy had far more chakra than even B did. If the teen was even half as talented as his father was, then his men most likely stood no chance. I began to walk slowly towards the duo. The young male had his arms crossed against his chest with his eyes closed. The Toad Sage had an annoyed expression on his face. B and Yujito touched down shortly after. Their gazes sought the young males and a tense silence entered the area. You too. Stay out of this. I didn't even turn around to acknowledge his strongest shinobi and kept his attention on the duo in front of him. The Reikage got within 5 feet of the 2 men and stopped, his 2 Jinchurikis following. It was quiet for several short moments before Jiraiya eventually sighed and decided to get to the point. My student and I arrived and were immediately set upon by one of your shinobi. The man threatened my student and my student retaliated. The toad sage's eyebrow twitched slightly afterwards. I was silent before his gaze swept to the blonde who still refused to open his eyes. The Raikage then glanced to one of his men stationed at the gate, and asked if what the sage said was true. Yes, sir. The Jonin gate guard replied. I turned back towards the duo before sighing. Bring the man here. Two Chunin proceeded to fulfill the Raikage's request. The Jonin was then dumped in front of the leader. I crouched down slightly in front of the man and stared into his eyes. Did you threaten these two men? Yes. Yes, sir. The man's gaze was locked on the ground following his statement. I sighed loudly in annoyance before rising to his full height. Faster than the Jonin could react, he was kicked straight through the village's gates by himself. The Jonin crashed through an unoccupied stand before coming to a stop. I apologize for my shinobi's actions. You are guests in my village and shall be treated as such. I then turned and swept his gaze on every shinobi that was present. If another transgression occurs with these two men unprovoked, you will be stripped in the gallows. Do I make myself clear? A loud chorus of yes, sir, chanted throughout the clearing. The Raikage nodded once before turning his gaze back to the two men in front of him. I believe we have a meeting to get to Jiraiya. Your student is welcome to join. The dark-skinned man offered. The young blonde finally opened his eyes, retaining that same blank face the entire time. He glanced at the Raikage before looking directly at his sensei. I appreciate the offer, Raikage-sama, but I will have to refuse. Naruto bowed slightly to the man. I do not wish to intrude on personal affairs. If it is alright with you, I would like a training ground to meditate in. I glanced to the young male before setting his gaze back on Jiraiya. That is fine. But considering who you are and what you hold, I will need to have my shinobi watching you. The young blonde just shrugged while nodding his head. That is acceptable. Thank you for the hospitality. The boy was incredibly different from his father. That blank expression had remained the entire time since arriving. Either the boy had an amazing poker face that could put veteran shinobi to shame, or it was just his normal expression. Yujito adopted a sultry smirk. Is it okay if I am the one to watch the boy, Isama? The young male was definitely powerful. If there was one thing that Yujito loved besides milk, it was fighting strong opponents. I gave a low sigh before eventually nodding. Behave yourself. I will not repeat myself a second time, the man warned. Yujito gave a cat-like grin at his warning and focused her attention on the Kyuubi Jinchuriki. I should be saying that to you, Naruto, Jiraiya stated. The young male just glanced at his sensei with his head tilted before shaking his head. The blonde began walking away towards the village gates, with Yujito immediately pouncing afterwards. Make sure she doesn't cause trouble. I trust her, but you know how she is. The Hachibi Jinchuriki just nodded and turned his attention to the toad sage before nodding towards him and disappearing shortly after. This is going to be a long day. Jiraiya's voice was tired and exasperated. That seems to be accurate. I following suit. Come. Let's talk in my office. The Raikage gestured and both men began walking to the designated area. Naruto and Yujito walked side by side through the village as she led him to her personal training ground. The boy was quiet and didn't seem to talk all that much, which wasn't necessarily a bad thing in Yujito's opinion. The boy was taller than her by a few inches and he walked with a confidence only veteran shinobi possessed. Considering the boy didn't look 18 years of age made the boy far more dangerous. Which again, wasn't a bad thing to Yujito. You're a quiet one, she stated as if fishing for a response. The boy didn't respond for several moments. The woman figured he wouldn't respond. I just prefer silence. It is coming to me. The boy lightly shrugged his shoulders following the statement. He was aware that the woman was similar to him. He assumed that she was the Nibi Jinchuriki. Yujito nodded her head at his statement. She assumed that he didn't mean anything negative by it. But he was a Jinchuriki that didn't belong to a village like Kumo. This village loves their Jinchurikis, taking pride and actually praising Bee and herself. The blonde couldn't imagine growing up in a place where everyone treated you like trash. I assume you didn't have the best life in Konoha, did you? The woman questioned curiously. The boy's head turned towards her before focusing back on the path. You'd be correct. I was ostracized and feared my entire life due to something I had no control over. The villagers believed me to be the actual Bija that devastated their home. A foolish notion. There was no emotion that Yujito could detect in his voice. No bitterness or anger came from him. The woman's eyes narrowed slightly. Could the boy's negative treatment be the cause? She didn't wish to say that he seemed slightly off, but you do not seem angry about it, the blonde questioned lightly. She was curious to see if she could get him to open up about the situation. After all, she didn't truly know how other Jinchurikis were treated. If you wish to know about my life in Konoha, you are free to just ask. Sensei says that I am emotionally stunted due to such negative human interaction. I do not understand basic human emotions. I also lack sympathy as well as empathy. The boy lightly shrugged following his statement. Sensei says that while I lack the understanding of emotions, I still have them, which often causes confusion. The boy turned silent after his statement. Yujito was surprised to hear such delicate information about the young man. Was he not worried about No, he wasn't. He just informed her that he wouldn't understand. It meant that she would only know what he truly wanted her to know. Anything that was actually deemed important to the young man would never be revealed. Interesting. The young male also hadn't made eye contact with anyone since her arrival at the front gates. His eyes would remain closed, or they would stray away from the face when talking. The blonde didn't lack confidence given his general stride, so it definitely wasn't that. ADHD? No. There were very little movements with his hands and fingers. He'd be fidgeting with a kunai if that were the case. Autism? Now that seemed more likely in her opinion. Just from her brief interaction she could tell that mentally something wasn't right. Not that there was anything wrong with that. Given his treatment in Konoha, it wouldn't be a stretch of the imagination to say so. It was unfortunate that someone who grew up a Jinchuriki like herself could be treated so inhumanly. The two Jinchurikis made it to Yujito's personal stomping grounds. She presented it with a slight tada, and the like. The boy furrowed his eyebrows in confusion at the statement. It is quaint. Away from others. Secluded. He nodded his head. It is nice. Which looked entirely too weird due to his blank face. The boy began to walk to a nearby tree and planted himself in front of it. He rested his hands in his lap and then closed his eyes. Yujito watched him the entire time. Once he was seated in front of the tree, it seemed like his entire body just stopped moving. It was fascinating. Was he even breathing? It didn't look like it. A distinct calming aura settled in the area. The Nibi Jinchuriki noticed it almost immediately. This is nature chakra Yujito. Matatabi's voice explained. He is a sage. An incredibly gifted one as well. He is able to juggle his own chakra as well as the natural chakra that is ever flowing in the world. It is incredibly rare and difficult for you shinobi to achieve such a state. You can count the number of individuals to ever master the ability on one hand. Yujito was shocked to say the least. Her eyes narrowed as she noticed the pigmentation that surrounded the boy's eyes. An orange substance? Appearing around his eyes. There were several animals that seemed to drift towards the boy. Birds rested on his shoulders while several squirrels sat beside his knees. It was baffling and incredibly amazing to witness. Yujito had heard rumors of Jiraiya being a sage. Whether they were true or not was up for debate. But right before her very eyes she was witnessing what her bijou described as the coveted sage mode. But why show something so rare and powerful? The boy might not seem to care, but she technically wasn't an ally. This was free information to feed to her village. So why? Matatabi's amused tone ringed in her head. Sage mode isn't just some fancy makeup. You would be incapable of matching the boy in combat. He would crush you into the ground. The fact that her own bijou was informing her of this was enough to make Yujito double take. She would get stomped? How strong of an increase of power was this? It is like comparing a genin to a kage. You would not win. The fact that Matatabi's tone was so exact actually made the blonde pause. Naruto's eyes eventually opened and Yujito gasped at the change. He possessed a bar-like pupil similar to that of a toad while the actual color of the eyes were yellow. They were incredibly mesmerizing. The boy blinked and they returned to their sapphire tint. The calming aura vanished and subsequently the animals scurried away. The boy blinked several times before focusing on Yujito. There is 2 toad sages in this world. But there is only one toad sage who has fully mastered the ability. Yujito could easily assume he meant himself on that last bit. The action hadn't even took long. Several seconds and that power had came and then disappeared just as fast. Amazing. You are very forthcoming with such information. The woman crossed her arms against her chest. She wanted to see what he'd say. It is not like such information would truly be detrimental to me. Very few individuals in this world have gained the ability to wield nature chakra. No one is able to defend against it because no one can use it. The boy leaned against the tree and closed his arms. Just because you know I can use the ability does not mean you can beat me. You know nothing of what I can do with sage mode. Yujito didn't take offense to his statement. The boy seemed to just speak truths and facts. Incredibly blunt, yes, but truths nonetheless. Perhaps you would like to show me just what this sage mode can do then, him? The woman had a Cheshire grin adorned on her beautiful face. Regardless of how powerful her bijou informed her of his sage mode, she wanted to fight him now. The boy opened his eyes and stared at her with an eyebrow raised. That is illogical. Running headfirst into uncertain battles is never a good idea, but I like to fight. It gets my blood racing and my heart pounding. You would deny me such a fight? She had a faux hurt expression. The woman truly doubted it would work on the boy, but he did say that he possessed normal human emotions. He just didn't comprehend them. Naruto stared at the woman in slight confusion, which served to look incredibly adorable on his whiskered face. I did not intend to hurt your feelings, I am just perplexed at the reasoning. But if you wish to spar, then I will do so. My only wish is that you keep what you learned to yourself. Yujito blinked at that. She could agree to do so, but she could also lie and then later inform her kage. You seem to be putting some level of trust into me. I could agree and be lying. The younger blonde just shrugged before responding. That is how shinobi life is. If you choose to do so, I cannot stop you. I was only asking for the sake of doing so. Eventually I will be forced to use sage mode in an actual fight. If I do not kill the person or if there are bystanders, then people will know of my ability. I am just delaying the inevitable for as long as possible. It made sense to Yujito. The boy was truthful with everything that came out of his mouth. That or he was just an incredibly amazing liar. That'd be something. The blonde eventually just settled on agreeing to his terms. She got to fight with someone with an incredibly rare ability, and all she had to do was keep it to herself? Why not? Though Matatabi seemed highly amused at the entire situation. Would she truly get stomped so easily? Only one way to find out. I agree then. Now let's fight. I want to see just how powerful this sage mode really is. Following her statement, the woman flared the entirety of her chakra, and similar to the boy's action earlier, the ground cratered and an insane pressure settled in the training grounds. Naruto was unaffected, it would seem. The boy closed his eyes for several seconds before gaining access to sage mode. The boy rolled his neck slightly before standing to his feet. Crossing his arms against his chest, he opened his eyes and stared directly at the Nibi Jinchuriki. I will allow you the honor of attacking first. Yujito gave a feral smirk before charging towards the boy. She was going to enjoy this immensely. Break. This is annoying to say the least, Jiraiya. I directed to the man sitting across from him in his office. You say the group is comprised of S-rank nuke neens? The man's arms were crossed in front of his chest. The white-haired man nodded grimly. We encountered 2 of their members prior to electing our 5th Hokage. Itachi Uchiha and Kisame Hashigaki. Both S-rank and both incredibly powerful. The fact that these are just 2 of the members makes you wonder who's the monster in charge of keeping these men and women in line. That was truly a terrifying thought to both men. To be able to keep men like Kisame Hashigaki in line meant that the leader was nothing short of monstrous. This was a major problem. You are certain they are after the bijou? The man stared hard at Jiraiya. The sage just nodded with a grim face. Yes. Itachi's first words to Naruto were, please come with us, Kyubi Jinchuriki. If that isn't enough proof, then I should just retire from the Corps. The man leaned against his chair with a sigh. I knew the circumstances regarding anything dealing with Jinchurikis and their bijus. Anyone who wanted to kidnap the host couldn't be plotting anything good. It was a shit show waiting to happen. Have you informed the other leaders? I was curious to see if Jiraiya had took the risk of allowing Naruto into IWA of all places. The white-haired man sighed at the question. I sent scrolls to all the other villages. Suna and Kiri responded, as well as you yourself. We have informed the Mizukage and Kazekage. IWA remains to be seen. I'm certain my scroll was burned as soon as it entered. The man rolled his eyes in annoyance following the statement. Yes. Anoki is not only stubborn but a sore loser. There was a certain amount of humor in the Raikage's voice that made Jiraiya smirk. Akatsuki is a major threat at this point in time. I am not so foolish to believe that Kumo is indestructible. While I'm confident in our power, the title of S rank is not given so easily. There are reasons for this. Jiraiya nodded his head in agreement. While I do not expect cooperation or alliances or anything of the sort, I am merely wishing to help inform the villages. My godson's life is on the line, and if I am able to prevent his death, then I will do anything possible to keep it that way. I nodded his head at the man's statement. B was his brother, and Yujito was his sister. He'd be damned if he lost both of them. I will see if I can get Anoki to reconsider. Perhaps I can talk some sense into the old bastard. I will inform my shinobi as well as. The man was cut off as he sensed Yujito's explosion of chakra in her training grounds. The Raikage immediately frowned while Jiraiya's eyebrows furrowed. I stood still with his eyes closed, getting a feel for her chakra. The man eventually just gave an annoyed sigh. Little shit almost gave me a heart attack. This talk of Akatsuki already has me jumpy. She is sparring with your student. Jiraiya gave a sigh of relief that was followed by a groan of annoyance. That boy is making me age far faster than I would like. He shook his head with an annoyed expression on his face. He wasn't getting any younger, damn it. You both are welcome to stay in the meantime. You have brought me important information. The least I can do is allow you two to stay to rest. The Raikage offeree, and he meant it. This information was far too important to be brushed aside. Jiraiya gave a smile and nodded his head. I appreciate this, Raikage-sama. The man proceeded to stand up and bow slightly to the dark-skinned man. I called for Mabui to set up rooms for the sage and his students so they could rest for the next few days. If you want, I can explain to you what the definition of insanity is, Yujito-san. Naruto's monotonous voice stated in the training field. The boy's clothes were slightly scuffed with dirt, and a few drops of sweat ran down the side of his face. Other than that, the boy looked as if he had just taken a light jog rather than beat down an elite jonin who harbored the Nibi for 2 hours. Said carrier of Nibi gave a low groan of agony before she began to shift and tried to stand on her feet. Yujito's clothes were torn and caked with dirt and blood. A trickle of the copper substance ran down the side of her face as her beautiful face morphed into an angry scowl. What in the actual fuck are you? Her voice came out hoarse and thick, laced with frustration. She managed to adjust her position to her hands and knees and began to stand. The blonde proceeded to heave slightly and a thick wad of blood flew out of her mouth. I am a sage. The boy responded. He gave a slow blink as the woman's face seemed to get even angrier. Did he say something wrong? He was a sage. Was his answer inadequate? Yujito's face pulled back into a feral snarl before her chakra spiked. It began to mix with her Biju's chakra, coalescing the two chakras into a beautiful shade of navy blue. Naruto watched on with slight curiosity. Perhaps she was finally going to take this serious. Maybe he should return the favor? It would be logical to give it your all if your opponent was going to be doing the same. Naruto tilted his head when several Kumo nin appeared beside Yujito. The whiskered teen immediately identified the dark-skinned man as the Hachibi Jinchuriki due to the amount of chakra he possessed, as well as having seen him earlier, and 3 unknown shinobi who likely were around his age: a blonde-haired woman with pale skin sporting a noticeable bust, a dark-skinned woman with unique red hair, and another dark-skinned male with snowy white hair. Interesting bunch these 3 were. The Kyubi Jinchuriki released his sage mode and proceeded to close his eyes while folding his arms across his chest. The Hachibi Jinchuriki was most likely here to prevent Yujito from accessing her Biju's chakra. Whether or not it was for his or her safety was up for debate. Sink Jinchuriki or not, he would still win. No need to get angry, Yugi? B had a large smirk following the statement. The 3 other individuals were staring directly at the male who had noticeably thrashed Yujito, and would have forced her to use her Biju's power to even touch him. You interrupted our spar. We were about to get serious. The blonde teen almost seemed bothered. Hard to tell considering his voice was blank. Who in the hell are you anyway? It seemed the red hair was impatient and crass. But she had an above-average physique, and the handle on the sword strapped to her back was kept incredibly clean. A skilled kenjutsu user. Like most of the shinobi in this village. Carry. Not cool. You remember what Reikage-sama told us, did you not? It almost appeared as if the woman with the larger-than-average bust was challenging her companion. Were they not a team? What if he's the long-lost son of the 4th Hokage? And you just insulted him? Oh man, not only will we be stripped in the gallows, but a war with Konoha could happen. And if that happens, then Kumo would be on a way ticket to. The male was cut off by his red-haired companion as she smacked him hard by the sound of his pained cry. What a unique dynamic. Why did you guys step in? I had this under control. Yujito gave a small hiss of pain after her words as B supported her left side. Sure you did, Yugi. Bro told me to rein you in if you took it too far. Judging by Mr. Nine's state, you didn't have anything under control. B had stated that jokingly, but the woman knew there was a hint of seriousness in that statement. She glanced over to the boy, knowing what B said was true. This boy had destroyed her. To answer your earlier question, I am Naruto Uzumaki. You are a crass woman. The teen pointed out. It was completely normal to Yujito, having actually had a conversation and then proceeding to fight the boy, that he would say something so pointedly. The red-haired female didn't take kindly at that. Though before she could say anything, Yujito stepped in. Don't mind him, Karui. That's just how he is. He isn't trying to offend you. She leaned most of her weight on B and gave a small sigh of relief. He didn't try anything. He already did. Karui huffed out. The blonde-haired woman glanced at Naruto and gave a short bow to him. I am Samui. These are my 2 teammates. Karui and Oma. She pointed to both respectively. Karui just glared at the boy and Omoi gave a short wave. Naruto's eyes opened for a slight moment before nodding his head at the trio. B. You called him Mr. Nine. Does that mean? Samui questioned her leader. Killer B stared directly at Naruto for several seconds before nodding his head. It seems Mr. Nine is strong even without his partner, eh? The Hachibi Jinchuriki stated with a small grin. It is what I am told in my village and by my sensei. The blonde teen looked directly into Kyler B's eyes following that statement. Naruto's eyes were blank and unfocused for a few seconds before he shook his head. The Kyubi and I prefer to be alone. I ask that you respect our decision. The Hachibi Jinchuriki nodded his head slowly while Yujito narrowed her eyes slightly. They both knew a warning when they heard it. There was emotion in that sentence. For what reason? They were unsure. The 2 locked eyes for a few moments before nodding slightly. If we are done here, then I will take my leave. You did well, Yujito. Naruto began to walk away before one of the trio called out to him. How about you spar with us 3? Samui called out to the boy. Naruto glanced at her and then to her teammates before ending on B as if asking for permission. Killer B gave a nod with a grin before he disappeared with Yujito in a shunshin. The man trusted them with an unknown individual who proved capable of battering one of their strongest shinobi. The man was either very stupid or had an ulterior motive. Naruto didn't understand his actions, but the man was already gone. The blonde Jinchuriki shifted his body towards Samui, idly noticing that her teammates already moved into positions just out his sight. They were competent, which was already a good sign to Naruto. Sensei did often say that a good shinobi takes advantage of any and all situations. Even after witnessing one of your strongest comrades and her state, you still wish to fight me? The boy tilted his head with a slightly confused expression. Samui compared it to that of a young child asking their parents a question to something they didn't know. It was cute. Are you mocking us? That's not very cool, Whiskers. I may not be a Jinchuriki, but I have years of experience. The busted blonde shifted most of her weight on her right leg. Naruto blinked at her comment before his eyes roamed up and down her body. He stared for several seconds before his head tilted to the left. Years? You look as old as me. How old are you? Samui narrowed her eyes at the boy as he stared at her body. He wasn't ogling her body, and he genuinely seemed to want to know. Yujito had stated that he didn't try to offend if his earlier comment on Carrie was anything to go by. He was a Jinchuriki, probably wasn't treated all that well. I am 29. It is rude to ask a woman her age, Naruto-san. Samui fingered the sheath of her katana as the words came out. The whiskered teen gave a blink and bowed slightly towards her. I did not mean to offend. You are a beautiful woman. His face gave no emotions away, but Samui could tell he was just being honest. The young male probably didn't interact with others and just isolated himself to deal with the treatment of being a Jinchuriki. That made Samui frown slightly. Regardless of being a potential enemy in the future, it was just sad that someone could be treated like this for something they didn't have control over. She shook her head slightly and focused her attention on his body. He wasn't tense, and his eyes closed after his statement. He didn't seem like the cocky type, and considering he beat the shit out of Yujito earlier, Samui gave a low sigh and made eye contact with her team. She gave a slight nod and their bodies tensed slightly. She rolled her neck to the left slightly, earning a low pop before she seemed to blur in front of the whiskered teen. Naruto's eyes opened slightly as Samui appeared in his vision. Her katana was headed straight towards his shoulder from her overhead swing. Naruto flicked a kunai into his hand and a shower of sparks illuminated the two as he blocked the woman's attack. As he locked his kunai against the bust of woman's sword, he noticed Carrie moving towards his left side. His eyes left Samui and turned towards his right as he kicked out with his right leg before Omoi could blindside him. The boy managed to shift his own blade to take most of the power of the kick, but he still rocketed away due to the force of the hit. With his leg still outstretched from his action, he shifted slightly and removed his weight on Samui's blade. The woman's eyes widened slightly at the action. Her weight continued on the blade as it slammed against the ground just as Carrie made it to the duo. Naruto spun on his left leg due to his movement, and hooked his right foot under Samui's blade before flicking it towards her teammate. The blonde could let her sword go and trust Carrie had the capability to block it, but the idea of being in a taijutsu battle with the Jinchuriki was unappealing. Samui began to move in tandem with her blade so as to prevent that outcome. Naruto glanced at Carrie before he threw the kunai in his hand towards her. When the kunai flew from his hand, the boy made a single hand sign. Carrie grit her teeth as she blocked the thrown weapon before a fist planted into the left side of her face. The girl was unprepared for the strike as she spun slightly through the air. Samui's eyes widened as she noticed that in her lapse of concentration the boy had created a clone. The clone turned its gaze on her before it palmed two kunais and began attacking her in a flourish of strikes and spins. The clanging of metal and sparks rang out as the woman defended against her attacker. The boy was incredibly fast, and he had power behind every strike. He left no openings and didn't seem to waste a single movement. The clone slashed low with its right hand and began to shift slightly. Samui's eyes followed the arc of his left hand as it cleaved through the air towards her temple. The sound of metal tinking against the ground was her only warning before a fist rammed straight into her jaw. The boy dropped his weapon when he began shifting. Due to his aggressive attacks, she could do little to defend against the punch. The woman's skull rocked slightly at the blow before she felt two hits follow up towards her abdomen. Spit launched from her mouth as the blows connected. A boot was heading towards her face as she managed to finally get over her daze. She wasn't going to be able to dodge it. Before the clone's foot could make contact, she was saved from further damage when Omoi intervened and took a strike at the clone. The clone struck his blade with the sole of its boot before flipping off of it to put distance between them. The real Naruto began to walk towards his clone and stood beside it with his hands in his pockets. You've lost, he stated plainly and shifted his head towards their third comrade. The two Kumonin were confused for all but 1 second before they immediately searched for Carrie. The red hair was on her back while a clone of Naruto restricted her hands with his legs and had a kunai resting on her neck. The girl's face was glaring at the clone's neutral expression. Sloppy. You have good chemistry but lack situational awareness. You should have regrouped every time I force you apart. The only chance of beating a superior opponent is with teamwork. The two clones went up into smoke and disappeared. Naruto crossed his arms and continued, when I mean teamwork, I mean it. Being able to attack and work off of each other is commendable, but it wouldn't be enough for someone like me. Konoha has remained as powerful as it has been because teamwork is something that is fundamentally endowed in the teachings. You should know what your teammates do before they do. It takes a certain level of communication and trust to do such things. But I was not privy to such things. The boy shifted slightly and stared into the clouds that Kumo harbored. I prefer to be alone. I work better alone. I'm stronger alone. I know that chances of survival are higher when working with others, and it's logical to wish to be a part of something more than yourself, but I wish to detach myself from such notions. The boy shook his head slightly at that before directing his attention back to the squad of 3. Jiraiya-sensei would tell you 3 that until you can trust each other with your lives that you'll never be able to beat a superior opponent. Carrie glared slightly from her seated position at his accusation. I trust them with my life. How the hell do you know what I feel? The blonde glanced at her before shaking his head. No, you don't. You hesitate. Should I place you in a predicament where you need to thrust your life into the hands of those two, you would drown. More accurately, into Omo-san's hands. Samui frowned slightly at his statement. It was something that she knew all too well from experience. Shinobi get to her age due to skill, talent, and trust. Many shinobi didn't believe in luck. There were many times that Samui had to trust her comrades when in battle. She was confident in their ability, and they reciprocated it. If what Naruto was saying was true, then something needed to be changed. She glanced at Omo and noticed he had a slight frown and his eyes were locked onto the dirt. It seemed the both of them didn't truly trust the other with their lives. Your teammate has doubts. As do you, Karui-san. Until they are fixed, then you will die when on a high-stakes mission for your village. The blonde began to walk out of the clearing. I state these things so the next time we fight you are more competent. Samui gave a sigh and sat on the ground while sheathing her blade. He's right, you know? Karui gave her a look of betrayal and Omo grimaced a bit. What do you mean he's right? Because he is. Would you trust Omo? Before Karui could reply, Samui interrupted. I mean it. If you had to rely only on Omo to save you from enemy capture or anything of the like, would you trust he has the ability to carry out the task? The blonde stared hard into Karui's eyes before the redhead turned her head away with an ashamed gaze. Exactly. These are things we must work on. I'm not angry with the both of you. I'm disappointed. We've only been a squad for half a year, yes, but you both need to lift the other instead of bringing each other down. I can't stress the importance of relying on each other more. She rubbed her shoulders before continuing. Do you think I say these things for my own amusement? You two need to get along. I let it slide for the first couple of months, but I'm stopping it here and now. Do I make myself clear? She eyed both of them and gave a hard stare as they nodded meekly. The busted woman proceeded to get up before gesturing with her sword for them to follow suit. Then prove it. Until you both can best me with teamwork, we will not be leaving this area. Before the two could protest, Samui gave them a fierce glare. That was an order. Disobey it, and I'll make this even harder on you. I should have done this when we formed this squad. I will not sit by and watch you two die on the field because of a lack of camaraderie. Now shut up and ready your blades. Break. Naruto pulsed his chakra as he left the training ground. He immediately locked onto Jiraiya's signature and began to make his way to his sensei. As he began to make his way through the village, the boy's thoughts began to unravel and focus on a certain person, Tsunade Senju, or Auntie Tsunade as she preferred to be called. She had declared herself as his self-imposed guardian when he and Jiraiya were sent to retrieve her. The mission was a success. Naruto believed it so. The woman did return and indeed did take the hat. That was their mission after all. Of course, there were many stipulations following soon after. She was the Hokage, and she had made sure the village knew it. Hiruzen had been far more lenient in his reign as the Hokage, and more often than not things would be swept under the rug. But when Auntie Tsunade took the hat, things got dirty and bloody. She had dug into files upon files of many of Konoha's darker ploys that Hiruzen and Danzo had enforced. The woman wasn't stupid. She knew that every village had its more darker side, but Danzo was a different story. While Hiruzen had kept Naruto out of the crippled Warhawk's grasp, she knew it was only a matter of time before he would strike. Tsunade hadn't allowed that. She decided to handle it the, as she put it, Uzumaki way. By killing the man. Yes. It was that simple. She had even gone so far as to welcome anyone who would further challenge her rule to the hat. Abuse of power would lead to a revolt. Such a thing had merits, yes, but the shinobi of Konoha also had to realize who they were dealing with, that individual being Tsunade Senju. The woman who could cause earthquakes with kicks and topple mountains with punches. A woman whose spirit was alight with flame after meeting Naruto. The blonde teen didn't truly understand the significance of their meeting at the time, but Jiraiya-sensei had tried to explain to him the importance of it. Thousands of shinobi against a single woman seemed reasonable, yes? Incorrect. Against Tsunade, numbers were irrelevant. She was still in her prime. The Sannin were famous for a reason due to their strength. Many shinobi liked to believe that Jiraiya or Orochimaru were the ones to be feared, but only true shinobi knew the danger that the medic presented. It was why Orochimaru retreated when Tsunade truly got involved in the fight. Kabuto had been heavily damaged by Naruto, and their only chance to truly survive was to turn tail and escape. It was unfortunate that the snake managed to get away. It would have been quite a large sum of money to get if his head was turned in at the bounty boards. Another day perhaps. Naruto was confident that the snake wouldn't be able to truly match him. After all, Sasuke was dead and he had no true vessel. It would only be a matter of time before someone decided to kill the pale bastard. Entering the hotel, Naruto made his way to his shared room with Jiraiya and opened the door. The blonde stopped at the door and gazed into the room with mild confusion. He hadn't done another cursory pulse of his chakra after the initial one. So the fact that a woman was now in their room was surprising, even more so considering she wasn't glaring at his sensei. She possessed snowy white hair that complemented her dark skin. She was a beautiful woman. Naruto slowly blinked and just shook his head while bypassing the scene and heading directly into the bathroom for a shower. Not even bothering to greet the woman or his sensei, the woman raised a delicate eyebrow as the shower head turned on. You have an interesting student, Jiraiya-san. The older male just smiled as he continued scribbling on his notepad. Yes, he is. Naruto has an interesting and unique outlook on life. He ended it with that. It wasn't his place to inform the woman of his student's behavior. She could ask him herself. The room was quiet for several minutes following Jiraiya's statement, with the occasional noise of a pencil scrawling over paper. Mabui closed her eyes and rested against the chair she sat in. I had informed her that Jiraiya and his student were to be treated as important guests. She was to be their guide for the next following days to ensure things were to their liking. The woman didn't know why the Raikage saw these two as such important individuals, considering they weren't lords or delegates from other villages. Just two shinobi on a training trip. She gave a low sigh as the sound of running water cut off. A minute later, and the Toad Sage's student came out with a towel wrapped around his neck. The boy had no shirt on but was mindful enough to wear shorts. Mabui was thankful for that. Giving a lady a free show, Naruto? Where are your manners? Jiraiya's voice was teasing. I have them. You are the one who is lacking in that department. This is my room. The boy proceeded to dry his damp hair with his towel. She is also a shinobi. If seeing the skin of another male causes a reaction, then she is unworthy of her position, no? He glanced towards the jonin and locked eyes with her. Mabui stared back with a calm gaze. The boy was lacking in emotion. The way he phrased his words had no mocking bite to them, and just seemed to state the obvious facts. She would indeed not be worthy of her title and rank if something this minor was thrown at her. You would be correct, Naruto-san. Though I understand that I stopped by unannounced, it is still polite to dress properly and introduce yourself. She crossed her legs in her seat and watched in slight amusement as the boy tilted his head. The blonde gave a slight nod before picking a scroll in the bed and unsealing a new change of clothes. He proceeded to put on his shirt and introduce himself. I am Naruto Uzumaki. Forgive me if I offended you. The blonde slightly bowed to her following his statement. The dark-skinned woman waved her hand dismissively at his apology. It is fine, Naruto-san. I am Mabui. I am to be your guides for the remainder of your stay. The boy stared at her face for several seconds before his eyes roamed down her body. Mabui raised an eyebrow at his blatant actions. I'm starting to see the logic of your statement, sensei. I have indeed noticed that every kunoichi is in fact beautiful. The boy nodded his head slightly before taking a seat by the window of the hotel room and staring outside. I never lie when it comes to women, Naruto. The man continued writing but had a larger than normal grin adorned on his face. I'd believe you if Auntie Tsunade hadn't punched you through 4 walls on our first meeting. You were ogling her body then, and you continued to do so even upon our departure from Konoha. A heavy pressure appeared in the room following his statement. Mabui's eyebrows furrowed in confusion after the boy's statement. The room was deathly silent, and there was a tension that made the woman slightly uncomfortable. The scribbling of Jiraiya's pencil stopped, and he immediately fixated his gaze on Naruto. If Jiraiya had any uncertainties about the boy's infatuation with his teammate, then they were dashed immediately. It seemed his student wasn't even aware of what he was doing. Jiraiya began to glance around the room and noticed that the walls were beginning to shake and the floor was starting to creak. Mabui grimaced as the boy's chakra began to seep out in concentrated pulses. Whatever was going on wasn't good at all. Naruto. Stop. Jiraiya's voice was firm. The pressure stopped increasing, but it didn't disappear. The blonde continued to gaze out the window, but his eyes were lit with anger. If you were any other person, you'd be dead. The blonde's tone was layered with acid as he practically spit the response out. If there was one emotion that Naruto was truly intimate with, it'd most certainly be anger. Anger was a simple emotion even in its various subforms. There was no confusion when a cloud of hateful energy wrapped around you. Naruto had plenty of it stored up in his body. The fact he was even able to master Sage Mode in spite of these facts was truly incredible. Mabui shifted uncomfortably as she sat in the crossroads of these two. Hearing the boy's statement was slightly worrying. Was Jiraiya going to push the issue? Is that a threat? Jiraiya's voice came out calm despite the tense situation. I don't make threats. Every word I speak is the truth. The boy continued to stare out the window and refused to even glance at the other occupants. Jiraiya knew a volatile situation when he saw one. His student was quite literally a ticking time bomb. Anything in regards to Tsunade was off limits. It seemed the boy was subconsciously channeling that same protectiveness that she did to him. The sage had teased the boy multiple times on their training trip about it, and he had noticed that every time he pushed it further, Naruto would display his emotions. The question now, though, does he push it further? You are upset, Naruto. Jiraiya calmly stated. It was for the best if he did not push it. The older man wasn't actually sure if he could truly subdue the boy should he choose to use Sage Mode. The abilities of a sage heightened your own power by leagues. It was literally comparing a genin to a Kage after the boost. His student didn't respond to the statement, but Jiraiya knew he was listening. Do you feel it? The older male crossed his arms slightly as he glanced towards the silent Mabui whose entire body was tense. I prefer you not speak of Tsunade in my presence. Jiraiya narrowed his eyes at Richi's statement. It was his own way of saying this makes me angry. It wasn't much, but he could work with that. And why is that? She and I are teammates after all. He noticed that Naruto rolled his neck slightly to the left, while a breath vacated his body. He was getting agitated, it seemed. You do not respect her. The boy's hands began to curl and uncurl at timed intervals. Jiraiya was unaware due to the positioning of Naruto's body. Naruto's eyes began to bleed red as he stared out the window while his hands continued their repetitive actions. Why Auntie Tsunade puts up with your deplorable actions is beyond me. The pressure began to rise and the room began to shake again due to Naruto's anger. Mabui flinched as the pressure wrapped around her entire body. Jiraiya gave a hard frown and proceeded to stand up. He would soon regret the next words that came from his mouth. You are being irrational, Naruto. You don't even understand why you're angry in the first place. What would Tsunade say if she... He was cut off as Naruto's fist embedded itself into his stomach. The Toad Sage flew through the hotel room door and crashed into the room directly opposite of theirs. Mabui's eyes widened as she noticed the crimson cloak covering the boy. 2 large, floppy ears sat atop his head and 3 tails waved behind him slowly. The amount of anger and rage wafting off the boy was enough to cause the woman to retch slightly. B and Yujito's chakra cloak couldn't compete with this. And this was only 3 tails. I'm being irrational? You are lucky that I respect you and appreciate everything you've done for me. Mabui cringed at the alteration of his voice. Something that should only exist in the deepest and darkest of nightmares. Jiraiya slowly walked back into the room with a minor limp, ignoring the onlookers and shinobi that were now investigating. Perhaps he shouldn't have pushed the boy. He deserved a bit of it. A light punch, if anything. Certainly not full-powered. He was sure a rib or 2 was broken now. The cloak that previously surrounded the blonde now began to dissipate. His face adopted a frown, and he shifted his body towards the window. I want to go back to Konoha. I'm finished. Jiraiya narrowed his eyes. They had 6 more months left for their trip, but in all honesty the boy already learned everything Jiraiya had to teach him. They were only on this trip due to the threat of the Akatsuki. The sage felt the need to warn the other villages to be on the lookout for members of the mercenary group. The older male sighed slightly before nodding his head. There's not much left I could teach you. So if you truly wish to, I can send a message to Tsunade now. The boy shook his head, which surprised the male before Naruto closed his eyes. We leave tonight or I go myself. Jiraiya's eyes widened at the statement. By himself? For what reason? Because he was upset due to their conversation? Naruto, tonight. The boy actually glared at the man for several seconds before disappearing in a shunshin. The room was silent for several moments before Mabui shifted uncomfortably and began to leave. I hope you enjoyed your brief stay at our village. She proceeded to vacate the building to inform the Raikage of the situation that just happened. Jiraiya just sighed before jicing a slight hiss of pain. The kid hit hard. I personally feel like you overreacted, Naruto. Jiraiya voiced in a slight petulant tone. Sometimes I wonder who the sensei really is between the two of us. Naruto's voice was the usual monotone, but Jiraiya could sense the admonishing undertone. I will reprimand you. The Toad Sage pointed out plainly. Jiraiya wasn't looking for another reason to anger the boy. A fact was a fact. You can't really assault your commanding officers. The blonde glanced at his teacher before shutting his eyes and turning back to the road. She would give me a hug and pat me on the back. You are delusional. Jiraiya's eyebrow twitched in annoyance at the boy's retort. It was most likely true. His teammate was incredibly fond and aggressively protective of the boy. The last person who tried their hand at the boy was Danzo. That man no longer exists. It would take the demand of Kami herself to tear Tsunade away from the young man. I swear I get no respect. The man was downright being a child and he knew it. I do respect you, Jiraiya-sensei. But I respect Auntie Tsunade far more than you. I also enjoy her company far more than you. Naruto's statement only seemed to deflate the older man even further. Do you enjoy hurting me, you brat? The boy didn't even glance in his direction and kept silent. Yes, he did. The 2 shinobi fell into a comfortable silence afterwards on their trip back to Konoha. Naruto had indeed insisted on leaving immediately. There wasn't much Jiraiya could do to stop him. He was more than capable of fending for himself. Naruto's head rotated slightly to the right and he stopped moving. His eyes remained shut but his head tilted slightly. It seems we have company. They are very strong if judging by their chakra pools. Jiraiya had sensed them slightly after his student. The boy was an immaculate sensor after becoming a perfect sage. It was truly impressive the feats a perfect sage could pull off. A few moments passed before 2 figures appeared in the clearing. Both individuals were garbed in a similar pair of black cloaks that had red clouds adorned on them. One was definitely a man, and the other was more akin to a fish mutant of some sort. Itachi Uchiha. Naruto's monotone voice invaded the silent clearing. The blonde's eyes were still closed but his head was facing directly toward the man. Naruto-kun. You've grown. Itachi's face was as blank as the boy he was talking with. Jiraiya glanced between the 2 members before focusing on the other member. Kisame Hashigaki. It's been a while. The Toad Sage had an uncharacteristic serious expression on his face. This was dangerous. Jiraiya was certain that the both of them could handle this situation, but when it comes to shinobi there's always that chance of death. These 2 were monsters. You and the brat got lucky last time. It's not gonna happen again. Same head has been itching for a piece of ya. Kisame's grin was far too large for Jiraiya's liking. You talk too much. Naruto's sapphire orbs gazed at the shark-like man. You're annoying. Stay silent. Following the boy's comment, the ground beneath the Akatsuki duo exploded and several clones of Naruto attacked Kisame. Itachi disappeared in a flock of crows while Kisame began to batter away the group. Naruto shut his eyes before holding up a half-ram hand seal. The clones that surrounded Kisame began to glow white before expanding and detonating. The explosion rocked the very foundation they were standing on, blowing up massive chunks of earth and several trees being reduced to ash. Jiraiya's mane of hair was blown back due to the force of the explosion. You deal with Kisame. Itachi wants me. Naruto began to walk towards the Reaper of the Uchiha with his hands in his pockets. Itachi was an incredibly powerful shinobi, but like all shinobi he had a weakness. And Itachi's weakness was extremely potent. The blonde would most certainly take advantage of it. Be careful, Naruto. Tsunade wants you to return. Remember that promise? The sage asked as he stared at the massive cloud of dust that was beginning to dissipate from Naruto's jutsu. Yes, I do. Itachi cannot beat me. The outcome will be the same every time. Well, at least his confidence is high. That was always a plus. Jiraiya shook his head and began to dash at the cloud of smoke. Naruto was arguably stronger than he was. If there was anyone who could match Itachi's prowess, it would definitely be his student. Naruto continued his trek towards his target. It was only a matter of time before he and Itachi were to meet in person. He did kill his precious little brother after all. Sasuke abandoned Konoha on his own terms. If Itachi had a problem with it, then so be it. Brothers follow brothers after all, which was ironic because the elder brother abandoned Konoha not on his own volition. Sasuke truly was a fool. You are confident. Itachi's disembodied voice resonated through the clearing. Naruto stopped moving and began to rotate his head to random locations in the forest. His gaze would fixate on a specific point each time his head would stop, almost as if he was seeing something not there. Impressive. You are able to track me even through my genjutsu. Itachi materialized in front of Naruto. The blonde remained still even as Itachi finally appeared. Do you wish to fight now? The Jinchuriki began to flex his muscles in preparation. His hands coming out his pockets and his eyes slowly opening to reveal his eyes. Chakra began to seep out his body and settle around the clearing that surrounded the area. Itachi glanced around slightly before eyeing the boy. To have so much chakra that you can negate area-wide genjutsus is truly monstrous. The blonde clenched his hands following the Uchiha's statement. Itachi noticed it immediately. A knee-jerk reaction. It seemed his treatment in the leaf caused far more damage than Sarutobi had predicted. The pressure was also increasing. An angry Jinchuriki is a dangerous Jinchuriki. Itachi knew that a prolonged fight was a disadvantage for him. The ground beneath the blonde cratered due to the exertion. I meant no harm in my statement. A poor choice of words on my part. The Reaper continued to observe the blonde even as the boy's chakra rippled through the area. Itachi could actually see his chakra, it was so potent. Should they come to blows, it would truly be a difficult fight. Truthfully, Itachi had wanted to speak to Naruto privately about what happened. The man wasn't angry, only curious as to what truly happened. There were only two people who truly knew what happened during Naruto and Sasuke's fight. Itachi wasn't going to take the risk of speaking with the fifth Hokage. I don't suppose you're open to the idea of a simple conversation? The infamous Uchiha questioned. His Dijitsu bore into the Jinchuriki, who stared directly back into them without a care. Itachi was now aware that Naruto was even more dangerous than before. The Uchiha blinked and Naruto's face appeared a foot away. The boy's left fist was on course to the older male's temple. Itachi's Sharingan could see the air being physically split from the sheer speed of the Jinchuriki's punch. Blocking was absolutely impossible. He'd have to be on the defensive this entire fight and only redirect blows. Timing would be his only counter to such force and speed. Itachi stepped back as the fist sailed past his head. Before being able to retaliate with an attack of his own, he was forced to jump back as a clone appeared above the boy. A boot careening towards his skull that would take him out of commission should he be hit by it. The Uchiha's hands shifted through 7 seals in a single second. A stream of fire erupted from his lips afterwards. The force from the jutsu pushed him back in air to further the distance between the two. His crimson eyes snapped to the left as the boy yet again appeared directly in his blind spot. He knows the Sharingan's field of vision. Itachi weaved his hand and gripped the wrist of the Jinchuriki. He immediately twisted the appendage and pulled downwards while shooting his knee towards the boy's stomach. The blonde casually raised his knee, stopping the blow from making contact with his abdomen. Both prodigies locked gazes for all but a second. Naruto's foot curled around Itachi's ankle and he locked the appendages together. Itachi braced his body as the blonde crouched lightly on his remaining leg. The boy fell backwards and dragged the older male with him. The two shinobi were perpendicular to the ground as Naruto's foot sprang back towards his abdomen and shot out with terrifying speed towards the Uchiha. The Uchiha managed to direct the blow outwards using his palm. The foot still scraped the side of his hip and he was forced to relinquish the hold he had on the boy. Itachi was sent into the air due to the kick. Even after being weakened, he was still pushed airborne. Naruto placed a single hand on the ground to balance himself, and he flipped into a crouch and immediately rocketed towards the Akatsuki member. A giant fireball was sent in retaliation for his efforts. The blonde clicked his teeth together as the jutsu swallowed him whole before eventually imploding in on itself. Itachi landed without a sound and stared directly at the explosion. The male was well aware that it would take far more to even put a dent on the boy. Jinchuriki were durable, and a single fireball would possibly only annoy him. Fighting an Uchiha is annoying. Itachi's gaze swept behind him, and he stared at the boy who had not but a singe on his body. His arms were crossed, and he was staring at the sky. You all fight the same. The boy shook his head and redirected his attention towards the Uchiha. The boy's hands came to rest together, and Itachi felt a surge of chakra explode from the boy. It's only fair that I fight the same. Itachi's eyes widened as a tornado of wind exploded out from Naruto's body. He began to retreat as the wind tore through the earth. It shredded several trees to small bits of lumber as it continued to grow in size. The unknown jutsu was absolutely devastating. The winds were roaring with a hunger that could only be satiated with destruction. Then it began to move. The natural disaster was sent careening through the destroyed clearing, swallowing everything in its path and rendering the earth to dust from the razor-sharp winds that emanated from it. Itachi frowned as he thought of ways to deal with this predicament. The boy's jutsus were on a level of destruction that only someone like Pain could properly match. The Uchiha doubted the boy was even trying. His Dijitsu could see the hundreds of thousands of wind blades shooting out from the tornado. A tornado of pure wind with thousands of wind blades shrouding it in an invisible dome of microscopic-like needles designed to disintegrate. It was as magnificent as it was deadly. The older male knew that Naruto was exploiting his illness. The boy could easily keep him at bay with jutsus like this. He would either have to waste large amounts of chakra to subdue it or be forced to use his Susanoo, both of which were unfavorable to the Uchiha. His vision was already beginning to thin as it was. Using his Manjiko Sharingan would be his only saving grace, that is if he could manage to actually land a hit on the boy. The blonde's speed was incredible. Itachi's Sharingan began to spin and morph until it fully changed from the trio of tomos, with it now resembling a three-bladed shuriken. Red chakra flared around him as his Susanoo began to form around his body. It appeared skeletal in appearance as the skull bobbed slightly. A ribcage formed around Itachi which then extended upwards forming the torso while two arms shot out of the torso. After the full skeletal structure appeared, muscles began to form around the skeleton. The arms flexed slightly as a shield appeared in its right hand and a shield in the left. A headpiece appeared on the head as robes shrouded the being. There in all its glory was the Uchiha clan's ultimate defensive and offensive ability. The Susanoo's eyes glowed bright orange as it banged its sword against its shield. Itachi raised his arm and made a slashing motion as the celestial being mimicked his movements. The colossal being gave a roar before slashing directly into the tornado. The tornado held for several seconds before it began to warp in distortion. The sword cleaved through the jutsu a second afterwards and a massive explosion of wind detonated the battleground. It took half a minute for the raging winds to finally settle. Itachi surveyed the damage of the battleground. Truly monstrous. The explosion had cratered the earth a dozen feet directly down with a diameter of almost 20 meters outwards. I feel honored to witness the Uchiha clan's most powerful ability in action. Though, it's unfortunate it will be the last. Itachi's eyes tracked the boy's movement as he jumped out of the massive crater. The Uchiha immediately noticed the difference of the boy. Foreign chakra shrouded around the boy and his eyes were different. Orange pigmentation colored his eyes and his stance was relaxed unlike the previous exchange of fists. His pupils were toad-like in appearance with a horizontal bar. The boy's arms were crossed against his chest as he slowly began to make his way towards the ancient protector that was the Susanoo. If you somehow manage to survive this fight, then I will tell you how Sasuke died. Itachi's eyes narrowed at the statement. Was the boy truly so confident in his ability to best the Susanoo? The Uchiha motioned his Susanoo to attack. The Titan raised its sword high into the air before it dropped in the blink of an eye. The weapon of chakra sliced through the air so quickly that a sonic boom erupted from the force. The Susanoo's weapon made contact with the Jinchuriki, and an explosion of dust blanketed the area from the attack. The dust began to fade, and only then did Itachi truly begin to understand why the boy was so confident. The older male couldn't believe what he was witnessing. The blonde was holding the sword of the Susanoo, almost casually without a hint of worry. His celestial being was struggling to drive the weapon down as the blonde's arm weren't even showing signs of strain. The Uchiha's mouth opened slightly as he tried to understand what was happening. He had brought the full force of the Susanoo down upon him, and was rewarded with nothing. The palm of the boy's hand wasn't even cut. Naruto's eyes locked with Itachi's and a bored expression appeared on his face. He shifted his arm upwards and the arm and sword of the Susanoo flew directly into the air. Itachi's eyes widened as his Susanoo shifted backwards from the show of strength. It was unreal. Naruto sped towards his opponent to take advantage of his unbalanced being. The Susanoo raised its shield to block Naruto from getting close. The blonde reared his fist back before rocketing it towards the Yata mirror. Upon impact, Itachi was shocked to witness the Susanoo actually being pushed back. How? The Yata mirror was capable of negating all physical and spiritual attacks. Itachi grit his teeth as his feet began to dig in the dirt from being physically moved. How much power did the boy possess? The Jinchuriki shifted his body before pushing even more strength into his punch. His entire body twisted and chakra rippled out from the center of his fist. The Uchiha braced himself as his Susanoo was rocketed backwards from the punch. The titan flew for several meters as the chakra construct dug its sword into the earth to halt its movement. Immediately after, the Jinchuriki attacked again, though this time he came from above. The two locked eyes for a split second as the Yata mirror appeared directly in the line of sight. Naruto shifted his body and raised his entire right leg in the air. His foot crashed into the shield of the Susanoo with a force that rattled Itachi's teeth. The ground beneath the Susanoo exploded and Itachi gave a grunt of pain at the attack. The absolute power from the attacks was physically weakening his Susanoo and his body. Naruto's foot remained centered on the shield for all but a second before he raised his hand into the air. A Rasengan began to form in his hands before it started to expand in size. The spiraling ball of pure chakra soon grew to the size of a small house. Senpo, Cho Odama Rasengan. Naruto slammed the gigantic ball of rotating chakra into the Uchiha's construct. The ground exploded out from beneath the Susanoo. Itachi's teeth gnashed together as he struggled to hold up the Yata mirror from the jutsu. The ball of chakra continuously grinded against the shield, forcing the Susanoo even further into the ground. Itachi's body shook in pain and blood ejected itself from his mouth. His body just couldn't handle the amount of punishment that was being bestowed upon him. He gave a grunt of pain as the robes of the Susanoo ripped off, revealing the muscular form of the celestial being. Naruto rotated his wrist 180 degrees and the ball of destruction began to swirl erratically and distort from his action. Wind chakra began to circulate around the overpowered Rasengan before the boy let the jutsu implode on itself. The blonde knew that his sage mode would protect his body from the blades of wind that would erupt. A gigantic explosion rang through the clearing. A mushroom cloud of dust skyrocketed into the air and settled in the entire clearing. The absolute devastation from Naruto letting his jutsu implode on itself was incredulous. The once green forest was now reduced to nothing but earth and soil. A barren landscape of nothing but rock and clay. Once the dust settled, Naruto was standing above the defeated form of Itachi. The Uchiha's Akatsuki robes were shredded and blood ran down his eyes and mouth. His vision was blurry as he stared into the unique eyes of his opponent. Naruto raised a single eyebrow as he gazed at Itachi. He was impressed that the man was able to block one of his strongest jutsus and actually survive. You didn't use Tsukuyami. Why? The blonde questioned out curiously. He crossed his arms as he stared at the Reaper of the Uchiha. He knew the jutsu was useless on someone like him, but he was still curious. Using such a taxing jutsu that isn't guaranteed to work is foolish. It is not as if my body could handle the strain it would give me. You exploited my illness as well as the weakness of the Manjikyu Sharingan. The Uchiha coughed up blood following his statement. The Jinchuriki proceeded to just stare at the elder male before shifting his weight. Your brother was a traitor, he stated out plainly. He was foolish and naive in his pursuit of power to avenge his clan. And you are to blame. Itachi stared weakly at the blonde for several moments before responding. I protected him. Danzo would have had me kill every Uchiha. I pleaded for his safety. Then you are as foolish as Sasuke. Naruto shook his head. Not every Uchiha was evil in Konoha. Annoying, yes? Only a fraction of the clan was actually planning to revolt. You knew this. Itachi coughed up more blood as he answered the blonde. The Uchiha were corrupted in nature. I was given orders and I followed them. To keep Konoha safe, I would do anything. Naruto stared at the man as he tried to understand the man's reasoning. He couldn't though. The only reason the blonde was truly loyal to Konoha was because of Tsunade. Was this similar to Itachi and the leaf? His eyes narrowed at the thought. Itachi would do anything to keep Konoha safe. The blonde would move mountains if Tsunade asked him to do so. Perhaps he and Itachi were more alike than he originally thought. You wouldn't question orders? I'm a shinobi. What the village asks I do. The village comes first. Naruto stared at the man before a wave of anger swept through him. He didn't understand why that statement angered, but he knew that it did. Then you die in vain. The Uchiha line ends today. Itachi closed his eyes as more blood dribbled down his chin. I am not the last Uchiha. There is one other. The male coughed out blood as Naruto paid attention to that information. He goes by the name of Tobi. It isn't his true name. A persona of his. He's the true leader of the Akatsuki. He pulls the strings. He is dangerous. Do not underestimate him. The elder Uchiha warned the younger prodigy. The Jinchuriki clicked his teeth in annoyance. He will fall like you and your brother. Every shinobi has a weakness. The elder Uchiha managed a small smirk at that statement. You speak as if you don't have a glaring weakness yourself. The Akatsuki has eyes everywhere. They know how close Tsunade is to you. A vicious glare pulled on the blonde's features after Itachi's statement. A blanket of absolute malice and evil slammed into the surrounding area. Itachi felt his heart stop for a single moment as his eyes widened at the sheer anger radiating off the boy. Even Tobi's presence wasn't as vile as this. If I have to crush the necks of every single one of you, then I will. No one will hurt what is mine. You all will eventually die. The slaughter begins with you. The crimson eyes of the Kyuubi bore into Itachi's very soul after the boy's statement. A blade of pure wind chakra formed in Naruto's hand. With a single slash, Itachi's head was severed from his body. Blood spurted from the decapitation, and the head rolled several feet. The blonde snarled before retrieving the head. He picked it up before plucking the eyes out of the skull and sealing them away. A dead Uchiha was a good Uchiha. He spotted the ring on the man's hand before he plucked it off. He knew that the rings bore some sort of meaning to the group. Kisame has one and Itachi had one. It wasn't a coincidence. The Jinchuriki pocketed the ring before performing a fire jutsu to burn the corpse of Itachi. He stood still for several minutes as he sensed his sensei beginning to make his way towards him. Kisame must have fled after Itachi's was annoying that he would be unable to kill 2 members today, but there was plenty of time. They were after Jinchuriki's, they'd have to come to him eventually. And when they did, he would crush them. Jiraiya stared at the charred corpse that was once Itachi. His expression was grim as he contemplated their next course of action. He and Naruto had already warned the other villages about the threat that the Akatsuki posed. It seemed that the group was now finally making their move. The sage was incredibly proud of Naruto removing one of their stronger pieces. Itachi was not a shinobi to take lightly. The fact his student basically crushed him was a testament to the blonde's power. Yes, Itachi may have been crippled slightly, but Jiraiya was positive that would Itachi had been at 100% that Naruto would still come out on top. It's the teacher's job to believe in their students. Naruto was like his father in that regard. Boy, would it have been a spectacle to see those two fight each other. The older man gave a low sigh and sat up from his crouched position. We should go. Tsunade will want to hear about this. It'll take a couple of hours at max speed. The white-haired sage dusted his hands off as he turned to his student. The blonde was staring off into the distance with his arms crossed. It would have been normal enough, but the boy was gazing in the exact direction that Kisame had retreated to. I want to give chase. But I'm also aware that should I follow, I'm no doubt to run into several members at once. I'm confident in my strength, but I'm not foolish. That annoyance will live to see another day. Naruto placed his hands into his pockets and closed his eyes before making his way to Jiraiya. There's not much we can do. Considering you took out Itachi, I'm sure they won't send anyone but their leader after you. Itachi was stronger than the members we have intel on. Jiraiya crossed his arms and surveyed the damage between the two prodigies. He shook his head at the carnage left behind. It was absurd. Kakaza the Five Hearts monster, Sasori of the Red Sand, Haiden the immortal zombie, Kisame the tireless bijou, and Deidara the mad bomber. The blonde named off boredly. They wouldn't prove much of a fight. Altogether? That's a different story. Jiraiya glanced at the boy before he began to head off in the direction of Konoha. He didn't bother looking behind him to see if Naruto was following. Yeah, well, most people can't take on the typical A-rank shinobi. You're talking lightly about 5S-rank shinobi capable of fighting armies. Naruto didn't respond for several moments, as he kept pace with his teacher. I am a one-man army who can take on an entire army. They are of little importance. I am more interested in the leaders of the Akatsuki. Jiraiya glanced back at Naruto in minor shock. Leaders? What do you mean leaders? His student opened his eyes and gazed at his teacher. Itachi told me that there is another man who pulls the strings behind the scenes. An Uchiha, the one who possibly infiltrated Konoha all those years and caused the events that lead to the Kyuubi being sealed into me. It was only inference at this point. The blonde wasn't even sure if his hunch was correct. I can't imagine how strong the leader has to be in order to reign in 6S rank shinobi as rowdy as that bunch. It was worrying that there was yet another layer to this puzzle. As if they didn't already have enough shit on their plate. Don't try to. It's pointless. You worrying will make you doubt your ability. Have you gotten weak in your old age? Jiraiya could actually detect some semblance of humor in the boy's tone. He was learning. Great. Wait. He was just insulted. Naruto was aware of the emotions that shifted on his teacher's face but ignored him. It was true, after all. Worrying about the future changed nothing. He just had to get stronger. Jiraiya increased his speed and pushed his body full throttle. The blonde immediately following suit. Naruto did wish to see Tsunade. It had been a long time coming, almost 3 years. A small, nearly unnoticeable smile etched itself on his face. Break. A beautiful woman with blonde hair sat in a wide-open office. She possessed a unique green diamond on the center of her forehead. Her eyes were closed, hiding her honey-brown irides as she rested her chin on her right hand. In her left she was holding a pen that was being flicked through each individual finger. Tsunade sat at her desk in utter boredom. Being the Hokage was probably the worst thing she'd ever done in her shinobi career. And she had quite literally torn people apart with her bare hands. Right down the middle. 2 whole pieces of a human. Kami, she hated being the leader. But it wasn't without its perks. A smirk marred her beautiful face as she reminisced on some of the things she had done during her tenure as the 5th Hokage. From ripping Danzo's heart out to single-handedly stopping a revolt due to how she chose to rule Konoha. Ah, such beautiful misery. 36 shinobi had been put to the sword that day. All because they disliked how she ran the village. It mattered little to the busted beauty. You either listened or you perished. Her sensei had been far too lenient with his authority. The state of affairs in this village had been appalling. The woman had immediately saw fit to abolish the civilian council. A shinobi village had no need for one. The woman shook her head in annoyance at that. She couldn't wrap her head around why her uncle thought giving power to non-shinobis was a good idea. Tobarama could be an absolute idiot at times. They had protested, but she of course stamped them down ASAP. Tsunade cared not for what they wanted. They'd listen or die. There was no third option. After all, she only took the hat because of Naruto. Keeping him safe was her #1 priority. Many had found that ideal to be asinine and had vocalized those thoughts, stating that the village came first over personal feelings. A snort of amusement escaped her at the thought. They could suck her non-existent. She'd be damned if the son of Minato suffered a second longer in this cesspool of a village. Her grandfather must be rolling in his grave. He and Madara had built this village on the ideals of peace and acceptance, and yet those very same people spat in the boy's face, abusing him and treating him less than dirt. Ostracized for carrying the Kyuubi and all the suffering that came with it. Had Minato and Kushina been alive, surely this village would have been purged for such insolence. Hiruzen did an awful job caring for the boy. She loved her sensei, but the respect she once had for the man was gone, allowing all this negativity to fester after Minato's sacrifice. The room shook as her anger made its presence known. He had allowed Orochimaru to escape, allowed Danzo to run amok and ploy behind his back, let Naruto suffer at the hands of this village and subsequently wiped the Uchihos from history. How? It was unfathomable to the blonde. Experimentations on the masses to the cultivation of Sharingans. Unacceptable. The desk she sat at exploded into 1,000 pieces of wood, the tiny splinters spreading across the room in disarray. Great. Now I'm pissed. Tsunade's eyes opened, revealing the beautiful light brown pupils that rested. Only now they were alight with anger. The woman stood up and began to walk to the window of the room, the hidden Anbu all cringing at the anger that wafted in the room. She flicked the windows open, which expectantly blew them off their hinges, practically eviscerating the wood and glass that held it together. The woman's arms crossed beneath her impressive bust as she stared out at the village that brought her nothing but anger and sorrow. If it wasn't for that whiskered little brat, she wouldn't have all this stress. She shook her head at the thought. No. She was just frustrated. It wasn't his fault. Naruto was similar to a kitten, well, at least in her opinion. Harmless until backed into a corner. He was more like a dog, a pit bull then. Kittens seemed to sell him short. The boy was dangerous after all. A shinobi, that is. He excelled in all things related to the shinobi arts, people skills and communication, etc. Not so much. But she had been making progress with him before he left on that training trip. The blonde's tense shoulders seemed to relax as gentle breezes swept through her hair. She missed the boy. A lot. This job was bearable when was around. Tsunade hadn't even saw fit to drink her alcohol that much anymore. What was the point if there wasn't someone to admonish her about the dangers it had on her health? Sure, Shizen would do it, but it was always more amusing when Naruto did so. A smile formed on her face as she pictured the boy's little pout. He was so cute. Worrying about her health and such. He most likely knew that she drank just to get a reaction out of him, or did he? That's a thought. Maybe she should ease up on the teasing then. The woman continued to remain still even as the door to the office opened and 2 familiar faces walked in. The 2 individuals stood at the splintered remains of her desk unperturbed, waiting patiently for her to acknowledge them. Guess you can teach old dogs new tricks. Tsunade would make them wait though. The 2 elderly individuals were silent as they awaited for their Hokage to address them. They knew that an angry Tsunade was a lethal one. You didn't poke someone who could crush concrete with her fingers and snap chakra metal with her pinky. It was stupidity at its finest. Koharu and Hamura were content with waiting. What do you 2 want? Tsunade remained in her position as the 2 elders straightened. There is a matter that the Shinobi Council is unable to solve. They request your presence, Hokage-sama. Koharu informed her superior. This was always the nerve-wracking part. The blonde was quick to anger, and it didn't take much to set the woman off. Tsunade gave an irritated sigh following the woman's statement. What exactly is the problem that the clan leaders of Konoha and other esteemed shinobi that I've hand-selected can't solve on their own? The woman's foot began to tap impatiently against the carpet. Hamura decided to respond this time. It is because they are physically incapable of solving the matter. All subjects regarding foreign delegates are to be solved by the Hokage. The most we can do is provide input, Tsunade-sama. The elder man responded in a respectful tone. The blonde woman gave another irritated sigh before rolling her neck. Who is the delegate? So help me Kami, if this is a waste of my damn time. The 2 elders winced at the unspoken threat. They were just the messengers, a woman from Tsunade. She has a scroll with the Kazekage seal. That is all we were told. The woman said it was for your eyes only. Koharu bowed her head to Tsunade after responding. The blonde furrowed her eyebrows before giving a click of her teeth. Let's get this over with. I want to retire for the day. The busted woman began to make her way to the council chambers with the two elders following behind. It took several moments to reach the double doors of the chamber. Tsunade pushed them open with her eyes closed. She took slow, measured steps as she made her way to the head chair that held the Hokage. She decided to stand still in front of the chair and crossed her arms beneath her bust. The individuals in the room had ceased their conversations when the woman entered. Tsuni opened her eyes as she gazed at each individual. All of the shinobi in the room sat straighter as her eyes swept over each person. Her expression was one of annoyance as she finally made the rotations. Every clan head was in attendance as well as those of who she handpicked to be here. The Nara, Yamanaka, Akimichi, Aburame, Inazuka, and Hyuga clan heads sat next to one another. Other minor clans such as the Kurama and Hataki were also in attendance. Tsunade gave a short sigh before focusing on Inazuka. Since I like you the most in this entire room, tell me what the hell is going on. I've heard the gist of the situation from the two fossils in the back. So tell me him? Her eyes bore into the feral woman's eyes, who submitted quite quickly by ducking her head. Tsum was happy that Tsunade at least liked her the most. So that was a plus. Of course, Tsunade-sama. As you're already aware of, I hope so, a delegate from Suna has arrived. We of the Shinobi Council are unable to discuss and solve matters that involve foreign delegates. We have no jurisdiction on the subject. The woman trailed off lightly as Tsunade's eyes scrutinized her. The blonde woman eventually rolled her finger for her to continue on. To which Tsum nodded her head at. Her name is Temari. Chunin rank. Prominent wind user. But you may remember her mostly due to the fact that she was one of the foreign shinobi that aided in the Sasuke Uchiha retrieval mission that occurred 2.5 years ago. She is currently waiting to seek an audience with you, Tsunade-sama. The feral woman bowed her head in obedience following her statement. The fifth Hokage pursed her lips before making a subtle motion with her pinky finger. Upon doing so, a woman in a cat-themed ANBU mask dropped directly beside Tsunade in a crouched position. Go get her. Now. The woman nodded and immediately disappeared to fulfill her task. A minute passed by before a sandy blonde-headed teen entered the chambers. Her ever-present battle fan was attached to her back as the entirety of the room gazed at her. She felt like a rabbit in front of a wolf den. Temari frowned as she gazed at the occupants. She really wanted to clutch her trusty fan right about now, but she'd possibly be cut down. There was some big fish in this room, Kakashi Hataki and Asuma Sarutobi being two of the few she recognized. Hey! You! Come here! Tsunade motioned with her index and middle finger towards the Suna Kunoichi. The blonde didn't have all day. She wanted to drink, and then take a nap. Temari swallowed thickly before making her way to the busty Hokage. This woman was far more dangerous than everyone in this entire room combined. The Suna Kunoichi could still remember the absolute monstrous pressure the woman released upon finding out that half of the team was in critical condition and Naruto had not been found or shown up. It was the single most terrifying experience she'd ever been through. Which was saying a lot considering her younger brother was Gaara. The older woman held her hand out expectantly. Temari fished the scroll out of her shirt before placing it in the palm of Tsunade's hand. The older blonde continued to stare at Temari for several moments as the Suna Kunoichi wilted under the gaze. The fifth Hokage nodded before prying the scroll apart and reading through the text. The woman's expression became more and more annoyed before she abruptly crumbled the scroll in her hands. Temari cringed at the angered look in the woman's eyes. How in the hell did she even grind the paper to dust like that? What the hell? The woman's fierce gaze found Temari's and she withered at the look. My office. Now. Temari gave a light yelp before sprinting out the room. The fifth Hokage rubbed her temples and gave an annoyed sigh. You're all free to go. All of the gathered shinobi just glanced to one another before wisely deciding to leave. Not one of them was going to even entertain the idea of asking what was in that scroll. She had grinded the paper to dust. With one hand. Do you not understand how insane that is? Not worth the trouble. Not in the slightest. Tsunade began to storm her way to the office. She kicked the door off its hinges, which blasted through the now fixed window that she destroyed several minutes earlier. Temari jumped at the action as she stood on the broken remains of the previous desk, a new one also replacing the one Tsunade broke. Kami, this woman is insane. The busted Hokage stomped to her chair and sat down in a huff. After several seconds the woman drew in a calming breath and went silent. Her previous ire disappearing instantly. Temari swallowed audibly as she shifted slightly in place. She was dead. Dead. This is where her life would end, a horrendous stain of guts on the carpet of the Hokage's office. Truly a pity. A person silently made their way to the destroyed window of the office and sat in the open space. The male gave a curious blink and decided to just watch the scene. All the while the two blondes never noticing his appearance. The ANBU noticed him but made no move to inform their leader. The woman was irate, not much else to say. Through gritted teeth Tsunade began to speak. Temari-san. Please try to make me understand. I've no patience today. Speak. The woman's eyes were closed and Temari straightened up. She flinched as the busted woman's chakra began to flare slightly. As you know, Hokage-sama, My younger brother Gaara was made the Kazakage, but the village has not truly accepted his reign as they still remember how he used to be. She frowned in frustration after her statement and looked down at the floor, unaware that Tsunade's eyes had opened and now glimmered with sympathy. The Council of Suna controls most of what happens. Gaara has tried all he can, but until he can garner the trust of the populace, he is essentially just a figurehead. It doesn't change the fact he is the strongest shinobi in our village. This wasn't his doing. He was vehemently against the idea. As am I. She trailed off after her statement and shifted uncomfortably in the office. Sunda was quiet as she processed what the 19-year-old was telling her. She was aware that this wasn't the Ichibi Jinchuriki's doing. The boy was similar to Naruto in nature now. Quiet and usually emotionless. It's no wonder the two got along well. Her favorite brat had changed the boy for the better. And now look at him, leader of his village, and at such a young age as well. Impressive. The older blonde gave a low hum and rested her cheek on the fist of her right hand. Her eyes became half-lidded and she stared directly at Temari, who shifted at the predatory gaze. So Suna's little council believes that I'll just bend the knee to their demands? With such little compensation? Temari shifted yet again at the woman's question. Well, this was getting dangerous. She loved her village with a furious passion even through the stupid decisions. She needed to mediate this before it got out of hand. If Tsunade wished to march her troops to Suna, there was little stopping her. Konoha could crush Suna with little to no effort. Naruto had already proven capable of beating Gaara. She wasn't sure if it was possible on her brother's turf, but the blonde must have only gotten stronger since then. I know that the conditions are not entirely favorable, but the village has little else we can truly offer. Surely there must be something I can do to dash. Tsunade's finger rested on Temari's lips, silencing her. The sandy blonde's eyes widened exponentially at the action. She hadn't seen the woman even move from her seat. The Hokage was staring at her with a far more gentle expression on her beautiful face. You do not have to do anything. I don't look like it, but I've been around for a while. I know how this shit works. A marriage contract binding our villages together is absolutely out of the question. I already know exactly who it is that they are asking for. The woman's gentle expression shifted into something far more terrifying. Naruto is the single most important person in my life aside from Shizun. And while I have nothing against you personally, Naruto isn't some little shogi piece that I throw around haphazardly. You tell your little council that if they push the issue, I will come down there myself. Do I make myself clear? Temari shakily nodded her head as the woman continued to glare directly at her. Stories of Tsunade's brutality on the field were known worldwide. Sunagakure as a whole stood no chance against the woman. It wasn't a secret that her village was the weakest of the big five. Tsunade's finger pulled away from Temari's lips before she patted the girl's cheek with an almost mother-like quality. Good. I'm glad we see eye to eye, Temari-chan. Now you're free to stay for the night before leaving. I'm sure you wish you get home rather quickly, yes? The busted woman gave the girl an amused smile afterwards. The gesture was incredibly annoying to the Suna Kunoichi, but she dare not voice it. Yes, Hokage-sama. The reply was stiff, and her eyebrow began to twitch as the older blonde continued her cheek pats for several more moments. Tsunade finally let off her amusement, and gave the girl a small nod before sitting at her desk again. Nico, escort her out. If anyone slanders her or even tries touching her, bring them to me. The purple-haired ANBU captain appeared beside the woman and gave her leader a nod before gesturing for the girl to follow. Tsunade gave a low sigh and began to massage her temples. Fucking stupid, this job sucks. Why did I take it? She began to grumble and throw curses to the gods at her misfortune. The figure in the window that had watched the entire scene finally began to move. The man crept his way through the room before placing his hands on the busted woman's shoulders. Tsunade's entire body tensed and her eyes shot open. Before she could smear the person who was able to sneak up on her, a familiar voice spoke. Because you wish to protect me, that is what you said after all. Tsunade's body relaxed under the gentle ministrations of Naruto's hands. She turned her head to make sure if what she was seeing was true. The woman's eyes raked up and down the boy's body. His hair was longer and more spikier. His face thinning up and his height had skyrocketed. Kami, he must be almost 2 heads taller than her now. He looked good in white. She'd thank Jiraiya later for finally being able to convince him that black wasn't the only color a shinobi could wear. The busted woman relaxed in her chair and closed her eyes. When did you get here? Better yet, why? You're not due back for another 6 months, she trailed off with a sigh as his hands worked their magic. The Jinchuriki blinked as he massaged the tense and knotted muscles of his aunt. She was wound tight. The boy's eyes glanced at the mountain of paperwork that remained untouched. Seemed she still cared not for the village's proposals. Jiraiya-sensei has taught me all he could. I saw no reason to continue the journey. He began to dig his thumbs into her back as she gave a low moan. We ran into 2 members of the Akatsuki, he stated rather offhandedly. Tsunade immediately broke the massage and stood up from her chair as she inspected the boy's body like a worried mother. The boy didn't react as he let her check every major organ and artery of his body. Where was Jiraiya? Are you hurt? Did you sustain any injuries? Who were they? How many? Are you okay? The questions rapidly spewed from her mouth as she busied herself with checking the boy's abdomen and cheeked. He was with me. I'm not hurt. I did not get injured. Itachi Uchiha and Kisame Hashigaki. 2. I am content. The blonde answered each question that was asked of him. The busted beauty stopped her search after his statement and stared into his eyes. His head was tilted to the side like a curious puppy as he stared back at her. She finally managed to get a good look at her favorite shinobi. A gentle smile appeared on her face, and she immediately pulled the boy into a hug. Both of her arms wrapped around his back and she lay her head on his chest. I'm glad you're okay, I worry about you. The boy's arms awkwardly hung at his sides before he slowly and hesitantly wrapped his arms around her. Tsunade's smile widened at the rather awkward hug he was giving her. The boy was still unused to gestures of affection, but he has definitely improved since that day almost 3 years ago. Several more seconds passed by before the boy finally relaxed in the position, his head coming to rest against hers and his shoulder muscles uncoiling. The boy said nothing as he stood in the embrace of his fellow blonde. He inhaled lightly through his nose as Tsunade's scent invaded his senses. His right hand that rested on her lower back began to wrap further around her. A warm feeling covering his entire body as he stood arm in arm with his aunt. It filled him with a unique emotion that made his heart beat faster. Naruto was unsure of what it was, but it felt right. I miss you, Auntie Tsunade. His voice came out small and hesitant, as if he was unsure of what he was saying. Tsunade's smile grew at the statement as she increased her grip on the boy. He was durable enough. A stronger hug wouldn't break him. Hopefully. The two blondes stood still in the center of the room for several moments longer than necessary. The ANBU in the room watching the entire ordeal silently. The three masked nin had their own assumptions regarding the relationship between their leader and the Jinchuriki, but they never speak it aloud. Only amongst themselves would the topic be brought up. At times, it seemed as if Tsunade cared a little too much for the boy. It bordered on obsessive at times. The boy had only been 14 at the time and never truly understood the mannerisms that people possessed. What Tsunade had been doing was out of the norm. She'd take hours out of her day just speaking to the boy about mundane topics, asking opinions, thoughts, and anything that would spark something with emotion. Day after day she'd spoon her way through. And each day the lingering touches would last a second or two longer than they should have. The gentle brush of her hand on his as he listened to her stories. How her hand would rest on his shoulder and linger when they were out in the village. The woman's gaze searching for something that only she was able to see. Whatever it is that their Kage could see had sparked, in their opinion, an unhealthy interest in the boy. Every day since the boy's departure she'd speak of him. Mostly to herself, or with Shizen. The raven-haired woman would sit and listen each and every time. Never bothered by her master's topic of choice. It was, I killed Itachi. Naruto's eyes opened as Tsunade Lytle pulled away in shock. She stared directly at him as her lips parted slightly. You killed him? She blinked several times as he nodded his head. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a scroll. His head is in here. As well as something else. She slowly took the scroll as she processed what had been said to her. It was just baffling. Sure, he had been pretty strong when he left on his trip, but being able to match and not only kill Itachi? How powerful did her favorite blonde get? What about Kisame? Judging by how his eyebrows furrowed and his lower lip twitched meant that the shark man had managed to escape. Doesn't matter. The next time I see him his sword will be in my right hand and his head will be in my left. The busted woman's eyebrows raised at how confident he was. It almost bordered on arrogant, but she knew that Naruto only spoke truths. If he was absolutely sure that he'd be able to kill the shark man, then she believed him. Doesn't mean she also wouldn't worry either. Tsunade's hands grazed his torso before coming to rest on his cheeks. She lightly caressed his whisker marks before speaking. How strong are you, Naruto? The Jinchuriki though was distracted as he stared into her eyes. It was rare to see such beautiful honey-brown eyes in Fire Country. Most individuals possessed ebony or dark brown pupils. Her eyes truly were beauty dash. The boy blinked as Tsunade's fingers pulled on his cheeks, stretching them out slightly. The woman had a small pout as she stretched his cheeks. He gave a muffled what? As Tsunade just continued to stare at him. Several moments passed as the woman gave another squeeze before letting go. This was going to be a long day, at least he was here now. So, tell me about your trip. What did you and that old perv do? Tsunade had Naruto's arm trapped between her busts as she led the way through the village. The boy didn't truly mind allowing his aunt to basically take charge. Wherever she chose to go he'd follow. Trained. We visited several other villages. It was interesting. His eyes found hers as he tried to show more emotion. Tsunade gave a proud smile, and her shoulders swung side to side lightly. Good. And which did you enjoy the most? She stared directly at his face as his eyes narrowed. His head tilted slightly, and he gave a slow blink. I did not mind Kirigakure, the weather was adequate. I have an interest in taking up a sword. Jiraiya-sensei was unable to assist me in that regard. Tsunade raised an eyebrow at the statement. Do you want me to have Nico show you the ropes? The boy blinked before glancing towards her. You don't have to go out of your dash. He was cut off as Tsunade placed her index finger on his lips. Her face was stern as she gazed into his eyes. Yes or no? The boy didn't verbally respond and instead just nodded his head at the question. The busted beauty continued to stare for several more seconds before smiling and giving a satisfied nod. Good. Nico, the blonde shouted. Draft up a training regime after I test his combat abilities. There was no verbal response, but the woman knew that Nico was listening. If not, she'd be punted across the village. Favored ANBU member or not, everyone was equal. The villagers and shinobi alike gave a wide berth as the two blondes made their way through Konoha's main road. While they may have hated the boy when he was younger, they now feared him. Even after he had practically saved the village from a rampaging Bijou, their opinions remained the same. Naruto's expression began to shift into one of annoyance as he sensed the negative emotions. This village reeked of sorrow, hate, and anger. He didn't miss this village at all. There were few people in Konoha that he actually tolerated. He most certainly could count them on both hands, though a vast majority of the populace he was indifferent towards. He didn't care if they lived or died. Tsunade noticed his growing irritation and shifted his entrapped arm. The boy opened his eyes and glanced at her in confusion. Come on. I'm taking you out to eat. You and Jiraiya got here late. I'm sure you're hungry. The boy just nodded his head as the assertive woman continued to tug him along at her own leisure. Afterwards, I'll have one of my personal ANBU members go and fetch your former classmates. Kakashi has been wishing to hear of your progress. She glanced at him out the corner of his eye to see if she could spot any minute shifts. The only thing she noticed was one of his eyebrows raising. I find that acceptable. I assume he has continued to up his training? He glanced at her with furrowed eyebrows. The woman just smiled with a small dip of her head. She was aware that the boy didn't mind Kakashi's presence. The Sharingan wielder had been under strict order to maintain his distance from the blonde, which the man never truly did. What Naruto asked was usually answered in vague ways as to not stir the ANBU that would frequently overlook their interactions. So for that, he got bonus points in her book. The blonde closed his eyes as Tsunade led him to their destination. Several minutes passed by before the woman eventually came to a stop. Naruto slowly opened his eyes and his eyebrows raised at where his aunt had chosen to eat. Ichiraku's? The woman had a small grin as her other arm flourished in the air. Tada! Ramen! The boy just glanced at her before nodding his head. This is acceptable. Tsunade frowned in annoyance before dragging him inside the establishment. It had been Kushina and Minato's favorite restaurant. At least that's what Jiraiya told her. When she was brought back to Konoha, the first thing she chose to do was take the boy there and eat. The food was actually pretty good. Ramen wasn't her first choice when it came to dining, but it definitely wasn't disappointing. The two blondes sat at the center seats of the small family-owned business. Tsunade let go of the boy's arm as she swiveled in her seat to face him. The woman rested her arm on the counter as her cheek rested against her enclosed fist. Susu, did you get me any gifts? You have missed my birthday twice after all. A sly smile adorned on her beautiful face. The boy's eyes finally sparkled with an emotion and his head turned towards her, and he gave her a nod. The boy reached into his jacket and pulled out a tiny black box. Tsunade's lips parted slightly at the decorative box. The design was absolutely gorgeous. Adorned with intricate gold streaks that meshed beautifully with the ebony color. It was designed to look like waves crashing against the shore. Since you gave me the Shodame's necklace all those years ago, it only seemed logical to get you one. His voice tampered off as his eyes glanced at the box, avoiding eye contact. Tsunade wanted to squeal. It was so cute. He was being bashful. Another step in the right direction. Judging by how intricate and beautiful the box was, she could only guess how much he spent on it. It's beautiful, Naruto. She gently grasped the small box from the boy and cradled it in her hands. He wet his lips as his foot began to bounce against his stool while his fingers began to tap on the counter. I bought it in Kirigakure. It cost almo. The senja hushed the boy from speaking. She didn't care how pricey it was. The price is irrelevant. You went out of your way to give me a gift. That's all that matters. The boy glanced at her silently before shifting in his seat uncomfortably. Tsunade opened the box and her eyes widened at the jewel that glistened under the light of the small restaurant. A lime green peridot in the shape of the Uzumaki clan's symbol with a gold chain piecing it together. Each individual link in the chain was crafted in the shape of an infinity symbol. Her eyes could also make out small engravings around the jewel, but she couldn't quite understand what they meant. Were they seals of some sort? They looked vaguely familiar. He got me a jewel with my birthstone. Her smile softened as a lone tear threatened to fall from her eye. She gently took the beautiful necklace out of the box and held it between her hands. It was so beautiful. The amount of work and craftsmanship that had to go into making this must have cost him so much. It is to your liking, yes? Naruto's voice came out uncertainly. She looked on the verge of tears. Did he make a mistake? Was it the wrong choice? He assumed that her birthstone along with their Uzumaki clan symbol would fit nicely. The woman all but launched herself at the boy as she gave him a fierce hug. His eyes widened at the action, and he was forced to brace himself lest he topple to the ground with the woman in his arms. From his seated position, her were all but suffocating him. Naruto ignored it though. He had grown used to it long ago. To my liking? Naruto, I love it! She pulled away from the boy, freeing him from his prison. The boy shook his head lightly and gave a slow blink. Tsunade proceeded to put on the necklace, flushing her hair out behind her as she did so. The lime green jewel coming to rest just at the valley of her. How do I look? She gave a sly grin as she shifted her weight to one hip, cocking it out and making a rather sultry expression. She pushed her chest out and gave the boy a wink. Naruto's head cocked to the side and his eyebrows furrowed. You look beautiful. Like Aque's Auntie Tsunade. The woman's flirty smile faltered for a second before it softened. She made her way to the boy, who gazed at her curiously. Her right hand came to rest under his chin before she planted her lips upon his forehead, reminiscent of the day she had saved his life and promised to protect him. Naruto froze at the affectionate gesture, his lips parting slightly as Tsunade eventually pulled away and returned to her seat. The boy's cerulean pupils watching her the entire time. Several moments passed in silence before a young woman's voice caught the attention of the two blondes. Hello? Welcome to. The two blondes turned in sync to the woman, whose eyes widened. Was serving the Hokage and her nephew today. Oh shit, crap. If she screwed this up, she was dead. She'd get blasted through the wall of the restaurant, exploding in a shower of guts and blood. She'd be forever known as the ramen worker that got flattened. Began to mentally sob at the thought. She was so young, she had so many things in life she wanted to accomplish. Like losing her virginity. Oh Kami! She was going to die a virgin now. More mental tears fell from her face at the thought. Hello there? Followed by a metallic ding of the metal bell that was used when orders were being called out. Gave a startled yelp as Tsunade's amused gaze found hers. Yeah, san, correct? We're here for some ramen. Blinked in slight shock at the question. You know my name? Tsunade's smirk morphed into a grin before pointing to her name tag that hung off her apron. Just gave an embarrassed laugh as she rubbed the wooden spoon in her hand. Of course you do forgive me, Hokage-sama. The ramen waitress bowed her head after her statement, to which Tsunade just waved off with a chuckle. It's fine. 2 misos, please. Gave a salute and a wide smile and began to work on the order, as if she hadn't made a fool of herself. Tsunade just shook her head with an amused smile at the young woman. Naruto watched the young woman retreat before turning to his aunt. The people fear you. His placid statement made her turn towards him with a raised eyebrow. They've always feared me, she answered rather lackadaisically. The boy slowly nodded before resting his cheek against his palm. His eyes slowly closed as he responded. More so than usual. What has happened since I've been away? Tsunade pursed her lips as she began to drum her fingers against the countertop in a rhythmic pattern. I've made sure that the village knows that I am the leader. Many were skeptical when I was brought back and inaugurated. You already know this. It doesn't matter. I was chosen to lead and I'm going to do it. Sensei ruined this village and now I'm stuck cleaning his fucking mess. Naruto didn't comment on that statement. He was well aware of the Sandame's machinations and flaws. Naruto didn't usually linger on the past, but he didn't mourn the man's death. The old man dug his own grave and he had to eventually lay in it. It was ironic that his favorite student was the one to plunge his blade into his heart. He always did manipulate things from the shadows. I never truly understood how he and Danzo never saw eye to eye. They were more alike than they wished to admit. The boy tapped his fingers against the countertop. It's fortunate that they both perished. Tsunade glanced towards the boy with a small smirk. Oh, is my little Naruchan pouting? Her hand came to rest on his cheek and lightly tug at his cheeks. She could tell he was unamused by the slight curl of his nose. I do not pout. I am a shinobi. Pouting is beneath me. The blonde continued her actions as the boy's fingers began to drum faster. Why do you do this? His cerulean orbs found hers and the woman grinned. Because I care about you. Showing emotion is good even if they're negative. You're not upset. So what's the harm? She lightly stroked his whiskers with her thumb following the statement. His annoyed expression disappeared following the statement, and he averted his eyes from hers. 2 misos for the lovely couple. Iam's voice interrupted the two as she plopped both bowls on the wooden counter with a smile. Tsunade's hand retreated from the boy's face a little too quickly. She swiveled on her stool before staring at Iam. The young ramen waitress belatedly realized her statement. Her eyes widened before bowing and apologizing. The busted woman continued to stare at the waitress in annoyance as Naruto just watched on. Lovely couple? His head tilted towards his aunt, who was beginning to chew the young brunette out. That same feeling of warmth spread through his body at the thought. His gaze went to the brothy noodles that now sat in front of him, and the corners of his mouth slightly shifted upwards. Break. Tsunade was once again pulling her favorite blonde along as they made their way to the old Team 7 training grounds. The meal had been enjoyable for both blondes. Where is Jiraiya anyway? Naruto shifted his arm that was trapped between her before speaking. He said he had some contacts that he needed to speak with. The woman gave a non-committal hum at the statement. She didn't really care where the pervert was, but keeping Jiraiya on his short leash was always the better option. They continued in comfortable silence before an ANBU member touched down beside the couple. The shinobi you've requested are at the location Hokage-sama. Tsunade nodded her head as the ANBU member disappeared. It took several more minutes before both individuals broke through the foliage that covered the clearing. There were multiple shinobi present in the clearing. Some were congregated together speaking with one another while others were laying on the ground looking up at the sky. The shinobi in the clearing turned towards the duo's direction and conversation ceased. Tsunade and Naruto leisurely strolled up the group of shinobi as Naruto's eyes opened. His former classmates had really changed in the last 2.5 years. Judging by their expressions, they likely thought the same. Tsunade, yet again, flourished her other arm and spoke with a smile. Tada! Naruto proceeded to glance at her with a plain expression. Normally, when presenting a gift, it is supposed to instill some type of pleasure. Naruto trailed off afterwards, at which the entire gathering sweat dropped. The blonde beauty chuckled at his response and pulled him forward to greet the other shinobi. The Jinchuriki gave a low sigh at her actions. He was indifferent to many of the ones here. The only people he would prefer to go out of his way to speak with in the clearing were Kakashi, Shizen, Enko, Shino, Niji, Shikamaru, and Hinata. The boy clicked his teeth lightly, which made the grip that Tsunade had on his arm increase in strength. He was stuck here and he knew it. His old sensei was the first to greet them. His right hand was in his pocket, and his signature eye smile was ever present. He made his way to the blonde couple and placed his left hand atop Naruto's shoulder, and proceeded to make the action one would do when ruffling someone's hair. The Jinchuriki just stared plainly as the man continued the gesture for several seconds. I'm certain you're aware that I'm taller than I used to be. But for your mental health, I thought it necessary to inform you anyway. A smirk formed on the Sharingan wielder's face at Naruto's statement. Oh, I'm very much aware. I just think it's funny. Eventually the man stopped his action before giving Naruto a firm handshake with which the blonde reciprocated. I'm glad to see you back, Naruto. I'm sure you're stronger than me now, There was humor in the man's voice, but Naruto knew better. I could take you on with an arm tied behind my back, Kakashi-sensei. Kakashi stared into his eyes for a single second before nodding his head. I stopped being your sensei after Team 7 was disbanded. Kakashi is fine. The masked shinobi didn't respond to the boy's overall proclamation. Kakashi would never doubt the boy's statement. There was confidence, and then there was arrogance. Naruto never displayed arrogance, and the man highly doubted he ever would. Tsunade let go of Naruto's arm and made her way to Shizen to speak in private. Naruto's eyes trailed after her before he caught the kunai that had been thrown at him. You have not changed, Enko-san. Said woman gave a pout before responding in a manner fitting a spoiled child. You act like that's a bad thing. And it's Enko-chan. Say it with me. Kaiawayan. The boy just turned back toward his former sensei and ignored her. Enko just smiled before bouncing her way up to the two men who were now conversing with one another. Shikamaru remained on the ground with his hands behind his head as some of the other shinobi greeted the boy. Most of which were returned with a slight nod of the head, or a simple hello. The Nara felt someone step beside him but made no move to speak. It was far too much trouble to do so. You noticed it, yes? The mellow voice of Niji directed towards the lazy male. Shikamaru just gave a low sigh before nodding his head. Shino appeared beside the duo, greeting both with a nod. It is still surprising to see you without bandages around your head, Niji-san. The Aburame teen commented on. The Hyuga glanced at the boy before crossing his arms against his chest while shifting on the balls of his heels. I have Tsunade-sama to thank for that. Abolishing the Hyuga's birdcage seal, I now feel like a true free man. I will lay my life on the line when she asks. My loyalty to her transcends the Hyuga clan's interests. Shino did not comment on the boy's statement, but he did give a nod to the older boy. The three males stood/laid in silence as the greetings came to a slow end. The Jinchuriki began to make his way to the three boys who he could call his friends. You three haven't changed much. He glanced at each with a slight raise of his eyebrow. Shikamaru gave him an annoyed grunt but didn't speak. Niji gave the boy a small smile with a nod of his head, with Shino giving the boy a nod as well. Naruto glanced around slightly before pocketing his hands and closing his eyes. It does not surprise me that Haruno-san isn't here. The blonde shrugged before continuing. Where is Lee-san and Tenten-san? They were sent on a mission with Kurenai-san. Team 8 has a new sensei. The Hyuga gestured with a head tilt towards the trench coat-wearing woman. Enko-san leads them now. I've also been promoted to Jonin. Congratulations. I assume you're the only one then? His gaze swept through the clearing before focusing back on the pale-eyed teen. Niji gave an affirmative nod at the question, to which Naruto just hummed at. We're all actually Chunin now, Whiskers. A feminine voice stated. The female wrapped her arm around Naruto's shoulders before leaning on him. You've gotten tall as hell. Naruto glanced at Ino before sighing. You dress like Enko-san now. The blonde teen just gave the boy a toothy grin following his statement. You'd be right about that one. She says to use my sex appeal to my advantage? Why? Do I look good to you, Whiskers? She gave a flirty wink as her body practically coiled around his. The boy's eyes narrowed slightly before he detached himself from the girl. You are a beautiful woman, Ino-san. I'm certain one day you will find someone who will keep up with you. Ino gave a slight pout at his not-so-subtle rejection. You wouldn't even entertain the idea of a date with me, Naruto? She tilted her head at the boy, genuinely curious at his answer. The girl was unaware of the attention she had brought upon herself after asking the question. Honey brown eyes had been watching the interaction since it had started. Tsunade's face was blank as she listened to the conversation between the teens. Naruto gave a low sigh and began to walk away from the small group. Ino watched the boy leave with a confused expression. Was it something I said? She glanced at the other boys who knew Naruto the most. Shikamaru's expression shifted in annoyance before answering. You make him uncomfortable, Ino. Troublesome girl. The boy sighed afterwards. Ino gave a small frown before looking at the other two for confirmation. Niji and Shino just proceeded to nod at Shikamaru's answer. What? How? That doesn't even make sense. Your personality can be overbearing. Naruto-san prefers his privacy and you were one to always invade it. It is only logical that you make him uncomfortable. Shino adjusted his glasses after his statement, which served to only confuse her more. But Enko does the same thing? How is it any different? She flailed her arms slightly in confusion. Because you're not me. Enko slapped the girl on the back of the head following her statement. Ino gave a yelp of pain as she rubbed her head. Let's just say you aren't similar to him like I am and leave it that. The purple-haired woman removed the saban from her mouth before pointing directly at Ino's face. If you push it, I'll scoop your little eyeballs out and force-feed them to you. Got it? Enko fiercely glared following her statement, causing Ino to nod shakily. The snake summoner stared for several more moments before nodding her head. Naruto silently made his way to the decently sized lake that sat at the edge of the training grounds. He stopped at the edge of the lake next to a voluptuous young woman with long navy blue hair. The woman's eyes were closed, hiding the pale white eyes that every Hyuga possessed. Both individuals were silent as they stood within arm's length of one another. You have grown into a beautiful woman, Hinata-san. The blonde stated as a gentle breeze swept through the clearing. Hinata's hair gently swayed from the current of wind before glancing at the boy with a small smile. Your compliments are always a breath of fresh air. Her hands clasped behind her back before her gaze shifted back to the water. You've grown into an incredible man, Naruto-kun. Your parents would be proud. The sincerity in her voice made the Jinchuriki shift uncomfortably, though he made no move to leave. He gave a small sigh before responding. It's what Auntie Tsunade and Jiraiya-sensei tell me, though I'm hard-pressed to truly believe it myself. I've accomplished little compared to my father and mother. Hinata gave small hum following his statement. You became a Chunin after 6 months of being an active duty shinobi, would have dominated the entire Chunin exams finals had it not been for the invasion. Single-handedly beat the Ichibi Jinchuriki after he transformed and mortally wounded Orochimaru's right-hand man. The girl gave a sly smile before continuing. You sell yourself short. You've done things that most shinobi couldn't achieve in their entire lifetime. All in 1 year, no less. I'm sure you've done even more during your trip with Jiraiya-sama. The beautiful woman placed a comforting hand on Naruto's shoulder as she continued her speech. You need to stop comparing yourself to your father. He was an incredibly talented man, but so are you, Naruto-kun. She gave a soft smile before removing her hand. The Hyuga began to walk away as she gave one last statement to the blonde. You told me that if I wanted to stand up that I'd need to fall down first. The blonde teen furrowed his eyebrows as he stared at his reflection in the water while contemplating the words he had spoken to the shy girl so many years ago. Had he truly started to compare himself to his father? Jiraiya and even Tsunade had told him that Kushina and Minato would be proud no matter what he did in life. Naruto had only assumed they said that to give him something to strive for. He was a shinobi, yes, but what for? To protect Konoha? The blonde shook his head at that. He didn't necessarily care about the village. Well, the people at least. If not for the village, then what? To reciprocate his aunt's desire in protecting him? Naruto gave a small frown at the thought. Illogical. He was aware that Tsunade was among some of the strongest shinobi in the elemental nations. His aunt was perfectly capable of protecting herself. It's not as if he couldn't protect her without being a shinobi. Naruto's eyes narrowed at the crystal blue water. He was a shinobi, and that was that. You didn't just hand in your headband after accepting it. You live as a shinobi and then die as one. Naruto glanced behind him towards the large gathering of shinobi for a second before pocketing his hands. When your mother was your age, she wanted to run away to a backwater village and disappear. She had told Minato that fighting for what you believe in didn't change the world for the better. On some level, I truly agree with her. Naruto didn't verbally respond and continued gazing into the pool of water. This world has always been dark. One good deed doesn't make us better people. I've killed hundreds if not thousands of people during my years as a shinobi. The blonde's hands balled into fists as his expression tightened. The newcomer continued speaking, well aware of the boy's emotions. Your father thought differently, you know. Always wanted to see the light in this dark world. Always striving for something more than himself. His hands were stained with blood after the war. So many men, women, and children slaughtered at the hands of the Kiroi Senko. Your father was only 20 when he ended the war with Iwabakure. Tsunade gave a shake of her head and moved closer to the boy. She stood beside him as she gazed at the pool of water. He always struck me as a naive man with far too much talent. He thought people could be changed. For the better at that. Kushina disagreed with him. She went silent following the statement, and enjoyed the simple breeze on her skin. Why? His voice was quiet and soft. She knew exactly what he was asking, but she wanted him to truly express it. Why what? She watched as his nose curled in annoyance before he spoke again. Why are you telling me this? Tsunade crossed her arms beneath her before speaking. Because you and your mother were very similar. She didn't want to be a shinobi, but she was the Kyuubi Jinchuriki. It's not as if she had a choice in the matter. Sensei was a shrewd man. The older I get, the more my distaste grows for him. She ignored his perplexed expression. I know you, Naruto. I know your mannerisms. I know what makes you tick, and I generally know what's on your mind. She was right, you know. The woman was referring to Hinata's statement. Naruto frowned before closing his eyes. It doesn't matter if she was right or not. No one ever asked me what I wanted. No one ever answered my questions. She detected the slight pitch in his tone. The boy's hands crossed. No one cared. So why should it matter now? Tsunade gently reached out and grasped the boy's dominant hand. Naruto watched as she turned his hand over, the palm facing towards the sky. Her finger pointed at the veins in his wrist before she began to speak. If this artery is severed horizontally, then what is the outcome? The blonde stared at his aunt in confusion before answering. If the right amount of pressure isn't applied, then you bleed out without proper medical care. The blonde woman gave a small nod before trailing the finger down the length of his wrist and arm. But if it is severed vertically? The boy just tilted his head before answering. Pressure is irrelevant if proper medical care isn't distributed. The damage is more severe due to how many veins are damaged. The medic gave another nod before she trailed her finger to his chest and rested the digit over his heart. Now, what is it that both require to staunch the bleeding? She gazed directly into his eyes following her question. It took all but a few seconds for Naruto to truly understand why she was asking these questions. She gave a beautiful smile before resting her palm over his heart. You have emotions, but don't understand them. What did I tell you 3 years ago, Naruto? The Jinchuriki stared into her honey-brown eyes but didn't respond. I will always be here for you. And I will protect you with every fiber of my being. I'm aware that one day you won't need my help. But that doesn't mean I won't give it. Anything that you need or want, I will try my damnedest to make sure you get it because I believe you deserve it. Tsunade's hand pulled away and her smile caused that same familiar warmth to spread through his body. The Busta woman gave him a small wink as she turned to the shinobi in the clearing and gathered their attention. Team 10 will be providing aid in Naruto's assessment test tomorrow. I wish to see what he's learned, and what better way to do so than have you three try your hand at him. Her smile was downright terrifying. Team 10 just grimaced at the demand of their Kage. The boy had already been stronger than them when he left the village. It was going to be a one-sided thrashing. Now, you're all free to go. It's getting late. The shinobi began to disappear as Shizen made her way to the blonde couple. She had been watching their interaction the entire time. Tsunade-sama, have you informed Naruto-kun what has happened to his home? The boy snapped his gaze towards the woman as Tsunade gave a nervous laugh. I can explain? The busted woman slightly shrank at the boy's piercing stare. The raven-haired woman just smiled as the boy grilled his aunt. It's nice to see Tsunade-sama smiling again. Tsunade sat in a private booth with a cup of sake in her left hand and a pen and pad in the other. Naruto had retired to the Senju compound after she explained what happened to his home. It wasn't her fault she destroyed the dilapidated home. It was practically falling apart to begin with. She at least saved all his belongings and stored them in the compound ahead of time. He had been far more tame after the explanation, so it was a win-win. The blonde woman idly twirled the utensil in her hand as she rested against the booth. Too many things had happened today. From Suna's marriage alliance proposal, Naruto's sudden appearance from his training trip, learning the extra details of Akatsuki's actual leaders and her outing with the boy. That last one was actually enjoyable. She gave a low sigh as she rested the pen against the table and rubbed the bridge of her nose before downing the glass of alcohol. The alcohol providing her with that comfortable sensation she had become so accustomed to over the years. She had grown so used to drinking large quantities that the taste had grown similar to that of water. It no longer affected her like it once did, but it was familiar and calming. The presence of a familiar individual sat down across from her in the booth. Tsunade kept her eyes closed and rested her head on her left fist. She truly didn't want to deal with Jiraiya at this moment. Things between them had been tense for 2 decades now, and Tsunade doubted their relationship would ever mend itself. The busted woman gave a low sigh before acknowledging her old teammate. What is it, Jiraiya? Don't waste my time. I have several things I want to get done before this night ends. The white-haired man pursed his lips and idly began to scribble in his notepad. I'm sure you do. The statement caused Tsunade's jaw to clench, and she slowly opened her eyes. Those twin pools of honey gazed at the sage with venom present. Jiraiya ignored the venomous stare and continued speaking. The brat told you what happened? The blonde continued her feast glare before responding curtly. Yes. He did. If that's all you came here to say, then you're welcome to leave now. Jiraiya continued to scribble into his pad, contemplating his next words. The man's eyes narrowed slightly before speaking. You know, he began searchingly. When I was younger, I had my fair share of run-ins with older women. Tsunade's head began to tilt as her eyes narrowed to tiny slits. It was always an interesting experience. Tsunade's response was quiet as she gazed at the sage. If I were you, I'd choose my next words very, very, very carefully. The woman's head slowly left her fisted hand before she placed them gently on the table. Jiraiya almost seemed to end the entire discussion altogether. Several seconds went by in silence before he bulldozed through. They were usually just flings and dash. The man never finished his sentence as the entire table was crushed by Tsunade's palm. The shards and splinters of wood rocketing out in the bar. Several shinobi and other patrons shielded their faces as the sharp pieces of wood assaulted them. Who do you think you are, Jiraiya? Tsunade's eyes slowly met his as her anger began to boil over. I'm not going to sit here and be judged about my personal life by someone like you. The blonde slowly stood up and crossed her arms together as her glare became ferocious. You had your chance 20 years ago and like always, you fucking blew it. You don't get to be bitter. You don't get to be angry. You don't have the right to judge me. Jiraiya's fist slowly clenched at the words before responding harshly. I did what I believed was best for us. Tsunade's arms unraveled themselves as she gave an incredulous laugh. That's just it, Jiraiya. It's always about you. You're selfish. Everything you've ever done in your life was for you and you only. Before the man could reply, Tsunade stomped the ground beneath her, forming a small crater. Don't you dare try to fucking deny it. I was always just some trophy for you to be able to show off. You've never respected me and you never will. The white-haired sage stood up from his seat with an angry visage. I was always there for you when you needed me. You always make me out to look like a bad guy. Why do you continue to hate me? Tsunade clenched her fists in anger as she tried to calm herself down. She so badly wanted to grind his body into the ground and stomp on his ribs. But she willed herself to physically calm down. It would do her no good to attack Naruto's mentor. Tsunade's angry visage disappeared as she inhaled deeply. Her hands unclenched and a bitter smile formed on her face. Jiraiya, I ran out of hate after Nawaki was killed. You need to grow up. We're not kids anymore. What we had is gone, and it's never coming back. I've moved on and I'm finally happy again. The only thing keeping me from crushing your skull with my bare hands is the fact that he would be upset. The woman's bitter smile disappeared and a small frown marred her face. You don't get to choose what you think is best for me. Move on, Jiraiya. The blonde woman disappeared immediately after as the entire bar sat in shocked silence. The white-haired sage stared at the ground bitterly before he too disappeared after several seconds. Break. Naruto sat in the room that Tsunade had prepared for him with Itachi's Akatsuki ring in his hand. His blue eyes inspected every inch of the ring as he took notice of the several unique seals that adorned the item. It was the work of a master. Truly incredible work indeed. Only an Uzumaki would be able to create such a complex design. The blonde inspected the ring for several more moments before he felt a pull on his chakra. He blinked slowly and noticed that he was surrounded by several projections of other individuals. He slowly stood up as every single pair of eyes locked onto him. Naruto's gaze met each and every single stare before settling on the man who possessed the unique Jujutsu. It seemed the ring was a way of communicating with the other members. If he understood the seals correctly, then there was someone here whose chakra they all connected to. Naruto was no gambler like his aunt, but he'd take a bet on it being the man with a Rinnegan. He recognized almost every single person in the room. The only individuals he didn't recognize was the Rinnegan wielder, the woman who stood behind him, and the man with the spiral mask. He couldn't see if the man had the Sharingan, so he was unsure if this was the Tobi that Itachi spoke of. It appears that Itachi is in fact dead. Naruto's cerulean pupils left the leaders before settling on the woman who stood behind the man. She possessed an incredibly unique eye color as her stoic gaze met his. Naruto's hands found their way into his pockets before he finally acknowledged the leader's statement. Jiraiya-sensei had informed me of his time during the Second Shinobi War. How he stayed in Amigakure and taught 3 orphans how to survive on their own. It is an interesting story, one he would tell many times. Naruto's gaze continued to bore into Konan as he continued his speech. He told me he taught a boy who possessed the legendary eyes of the Sage of 6 Paths, the Rinnegan. A young red-haired boy with a timid personality. Despite Konan's stoic gaze, she was becoming unnerved by the boy's stare and his words. It reminded her far too much of Nagato's puppets. There was little, if any, emotion in those blue orbs. The boy also knew far too much information already, it would seem. But you are clearly not that little boy. Sensei said that the 3 orphans died. A young boy with orange hair and a young girl with lavender hair, Yahiko, Konan, and Nagato. It could be a coincidence after all. But we are shinobi. We do not believe in coincidences. The puppet of Yahiko gave a small, nearly unnoticeable frown as he stared at the Kyuubi Jinchuriki. Your words mean little to me. I am God. Your death will usher in a new era of peace. Naruto's face shifted to one of annoyance, as his gaze remained on the only woman in the Akatsuki. So much power in a man with foolish ideas. Peace? In our world? Do you truly believe in those words? Konan's mouth shifted into a small frown after the boy's words. It doesn't matter if I truly believe them or not. I have the power to shift the world and I will do so. Collecting the bijou is the first step. Naruto's eyes finally left Conan's before settling on Pain. If a man says something enough times, he will start to believe it. You mistake me for a simple man. I am God. Naruto shook his head with an annoyed frown before replying. The only thing special about you is those eyes. Without them you are nothing. Pain narrowed his eyes at the boy as his head tilted. I will come for you personally, Kyuubi Jinchuriki. Naruto's hands came out of his pockets as he turned them palm side up. You will die doing so. Just like Itachi did. After I kill you, Amigekura's next. The strong thrive and the weak perish. The boy's astral projection began to disappear after his words as the puppet of Yahiko frowned. Itachi was an important member of the group, and with his death, there was going to be issues. Nagato needed to push their plans ahead of schedule. The Kyuubi Jinchuriki was another factor. But the man was confident that he'd be able to deal with the boy. After all, he was Pain, the god of aim. Naruto slowly blinked as he found himself back in his room at the Senju compound. He rolled the ring in his hands for several seconds before his head shifted towards the door of his room. Naruto blinked several times as he sensed his aunt enter the house. Several moments of seemingly silence passed before his eyes narrowed. The blonde sealed the ring away before making his way towards Tsunade. Something was wrong. He could sense it. He made his way through the ever-winding halls of the extremely large home before finding Tsunade sitting on the couch with her hands covering her face as her body was racked with slight trembles. The boy scowled before making his way towards the woman. The closer that the Jinchuriki got, the more sobs he could hear from her. His fists began to clench as he immediately dashed towards her. Tsunade jumped in shock as Naruto gently pried her hands away from her face. Her eyes met his and she could practically taste the anger that was beginning to permeate in the air. Tears slowly slid down her face as his thumbs lightly stroked the back of her hands. Who did this? Tsunade's eyes narrowed in sadness as she glanced at the ground in silence. She may not particularly like Jiraiya, but if she told the boy, then he would fly off the handle. Tsunade was aware that she doted on the boy and was viciously protective of him. But the sheer rage wafting off of him was palpable. She truly wasn't sure if Naruto would go out of his way to attack Jiraiya. It doesn't matter, she gave a small sniff before continuing. You don't need to get involved. Naruto continued to stare at the woman for several seconds as he idly stroked the woman's hands. There was only several specific things that would ever make the woman crack like this. Reminiscing on Dan and Iwaki were one of them, but she disproved that due to her statement. Ruling that out meant it was either something with Shizen or Jiraiya, and considering he spoke with Shizen a short while ago before the woman retired to her own room, Sensei needs to learn exactly what respect is. His hands detached themselves from hers as he began to leave to go have a talk with Jiraiya. Before the boy could take 2 steps away, Tsunade grabbed a hold of his hand, stopping him. The boy furrowed his eyebrows in confusion before glancing at his aunt. Why are you stopping me? Tsunade gave a low sigh before drying her eyes with her other hand. I told you I don't want you getting involved. I can handle this myself. The boy just continued to stare at her with a blank face even as she soothingly stroked his hand. I already told Sensei how I felt about his actions regarding you. The woman frowned before sighing softly. It seemed she'd have to do this the hard way. Her face hardened before she stared directly into the boy's cerulean pupils. Naruto. What did I just say? The boy blinked slowly as a frown formed on his face. You will not get involved. I do not want you getting involved. This is between him and I've already settled it. If it continues, on the other hand, the woman trailed off at the end, but she knew he would understand. She could tell he was getting frustrated due to his fingers curling under her hand and how his nose pulled back slightly. The woman sighed before getting up and gently caressing his face. Please, Naruto? For me? The boy averted his gaze from hers as his shoulders uncoiled. He stared at the ground in annoyance for several seconds before responding. If that is what you wish. Tsunade pursed her lips before a small, teasing smile framed her visage. Is my little Naruchan pouting? I thought you were a shinobi and you didn't pout. The woman's hand began to pat his cheek like a mother would do to their child. Her smile grew larger as his nose curled even more at the gesture and statement. She continued to do the annoying gesture, knowing that he would crack eventually. The blonde grew tired of the gesture after several seconds and gripped her hand gently before moving it away from his face. Must you do this every time? His eyes narrowed as her grin grew even bigger. My little Naruchan. Your auntie loves you very much. I know you feel the same. Naruto's head tilted as the words left Tsunade's mouth. Her tone shifted towards the end, almost as if she knew something he didn't. He gazed at the woman in confusion as that teasing smile shifted into something different. The boy didn't understand the action, and it was gone before he could fully analyze it. I'm glad that you're so protective of me, Naruto. Her hand gently stroked his whiskers before pulling away. Thank you? The boy just nodded at the statement as Tsunade began to walk away. Get some sleep. You do have that assessment test tomorrow after all. It's going to be where the Chunin exam finals were held. Good night, Naruto. The boy's eyes remained on the woman until she rounded the corner of the living room. Break. Naruto sighed to himself as he was pulled along by the Hokage to the arena. He saw no reason to even have to do this, but his aunt was adamant he do so. He was one of, if not the strongest shinobi in the village. The only exceptions were Tsunade and Might Guy, both of which could match him in strength and speed. Tsunade glanced at the boy before sighing. I know you don't want to do this, but I need to see you in action. I don't doubt for a second that you've gotten even stronger. I just wished to see how much. The Jinchuriki gave her a nod, to which she smiled at, clearly happy that he was complying with her demands. The two blondes walked in silence before entering the massive coliseum. Upon entering, the teen gave an annoyed click of his teeth as he spotted the numerous onlookers who were waiting to witness the spectacle. There was far more people than he would have preferred here in the arena. The Hokage shook her head lightly at his reaction before pulling him along, the young teen making no effort to stop her. You'll live, Naruto. Just one fight and then we can go home, okay? The woman's honey brown eyes locked onto his and he gave a small nod. The duo continued their journey towards the center of the arena as the shinobi ceased their conversation. The Hokage let go of the boy's arm and began to walk further towards the stands before explaining in depth what was happening and why it was happening. Naruto tuned out the explanation due to already having heard it. His eyes roamed around the rocky terrain as he spotted the entirety of Team 10 preparing for the fight. Asuma was sharpening his knives, Choji and Ino were stretching, and to the surprise of no one, Shikamaru was laying on the ground with his eyes closed. Truly a man of class. Naruto idly noticed that Tsunade was now standing against one of the metal railings as Team 10 began to move towards the center of the arena. The blonde rolled his neck several times before his attention snapped towards the opposite side of the stands. The boy's stare shifted into annoyance as he gazed at the individual standing at the farthest part of the arena. Tsunade immediately shifted her attention towards the area and, upon noticing who was standing there, tried to stop Naruto from acting. The woman was too slow to do so as the boy disappeared in a burst of speed. Naruto appeared crouching on the metal railings of the arena as he stared at Jiraiya, his face being only several inches away from the man's own. The two men stared into each other's eyes for several moments as the shinobi around the duo began to move away. They could sense the tension between the two and wanted no part in it. The blonde Hokage gave a frustrated growl at the man's timing. He just had to show his stupid face after what happened last night. The idiot had to know that Naruto would find out. Why was he even here to begin with? We already did this before, sensei. Do you wish for the same outcome? Naruto tilted his head as he stared at his mentor. The white-haired man gave a small frown before responding dismissively. This doesn't concern you, brat. Naruto's eyes narrowed as they turned cold. Tsunade is my concern. When will you grow up, sensei? Jiraiya's face hardened at the statement as his eyes narrowed. What happens between Tsunade and I is between us, not her little guard dog. Naruto's face became blank before he slowly rose to his full height on the metal railing. The boy towered over Jiraiya as he cracked his neck. Big words from a small man. The Toad Sage glared at the boy for several moments before shaking his head and walking away. Naruto's eyes narrowed as his face pulled back into a scowl. Always running away from your problems. Just like when you disappeared after father's death. What excuse are you going to make up this time, godfather? Jiraiya stopped dead in his tracks as his fists tightened in anger. Naruto's fists responded in kind as he glared in anger at Jiraiya's back. You think you're the only one who suffered because of his death? I had no one. No mother. No father. You didn't do your job. Naruto's eyes bled crimson as his anger boiled over. He trusted you, and you spit on his grave. Jiraiya spun around and glared daggers at the boy. I wasn't mature enough to raise you. You think I wanted to leave you alone? Naruto's glare became vicious as he stepped off the railing onto the ground. You're not even mature now. It was never about being mature. It was about doing what was asked of you. Father tasked you with my care and you failed. I trusted sensei to watch over you. The Jinchuriki's chakra exploded beneath his feet as his anger exploded. I'll kill you! The man's eyes widened as the boy appeared in a flash directly in front of him. Jiraiya was unable to prevent the fist that embedded itself into his abdomen. Saliva and blood shot out from his mouth as he doubled over in pain. When? The Jinchuriki's clawed hand wrapped itself around the man's face before slamming his body into the cement, forming a large crater. Jiraiya shouted in pain as his vision was obscured from the hand. Before he could even think to defend himself, he was sent careening into the arena, spinning uncontrollably. The blonde teen gave a shout of anger before disappearing in a flash and reappearing directly above the sage. Jiraiya tried for a hasty defense but was unsuccessful as the boy's boot connected with his face. The man rocketed towards the ground from the kick as a large explosion of dust kicked up from the attack. Tsunade grit her teeth as she ripped off her green haori. Naruto was going to kill the man if she didn't stop him. Guy. Kakashi. On me. He's going to kill him if we don't intervene. Kakashi and Guy sped towards Tsunade as she leaped over the railing and dashed towards Naruto and Jiraiya. Make sure you take this serious. He's liable to cause severe damage. The statement caused both men to glance at each other before nodding. Kakashi pulled his headband up, revealing his matured Sharingan as Guy opened the fifth gate. Guy immediately appeared before Naruto as he blocked the kick that was heading towards Jiraiya's skull. The sheer strength from the kick being blocked made Guy give a low grunt. The two men locked eyes for a split second before Guy was forced to duck from an attack from behind by one of the boy's clones. The taijutsu user dispatched the clone with a roundhouse but was unable to prevent the boy from kicking Jiraiya into the arena's wall. The Toad Sage coughed up blood as his back impacted the wall, forming a giant human-sized hole. The man collapsed onto the ground with a small grunt as he struggled to raise himself to one knee. Naruto's vision was obstructed as Guy stood in his direct field of view. The blonde snarled as his muscles began to coil. Move! Before I make you. Guy frowned before settling in his Goken stance. I cannot, Naruto-kun. Hokage-sama has given me an order, and I must follow it. The blonde slowly turned his head behind him as Tsunade and Kakashi appeared. His mouth began to pull back, revealing his sharpened canines, and his fingers curled in agitation. Why? Why do you protect him still? Tsunade frowned in sadness at the look of frustration etched on the boy's face. The look of betrayal that shone in his eyes made her stomach churn. He was hurting. Tsunade subtly ordered Guy, Kakashi, and the surrounding ANBU to stand down. She exhaled a low breath before slowly and calmly walking towards the boy. She raised her hands towards the boy as her palms rested towards the sky. Oh, Naruto-kun, I'm not protecting him. Her voice took on a soothing tone as her honey brown eyes met his blood-red ones. But you'll kill him if I don't step in. I know that you're hurting Naruto-kun. His slitted pupils found the ground as his mouth pulled back in a grimace. Jiraiya should have been there for you, I should have been here. The woman was within arm's reach of the boy before she gently took his hand in hers. Her eyes narrowed in sadness as tears dripped down the boy's face. Killing him won't relieve that pain. Her other hand came to rest on the back of his head as she gently stroked the mane of spiky hair. Tsunade gently guided his head towards her as she whispered into his ear. Kakashi took note of how quickly the boy calmed down after the woman's whisper. He was unsure of what was said, but it accomplished the woman's goal. Kakashi glanced towards Jiraiya, who was now sitting on the ground with his back resting against the wall of the Colosseum. The man's face was contorted in a grimace as he gave a low wheeze. Tsunade's gaze found Jiraiya's, and she gave a vicious glare at the man. He shouldn't even have been here in the first place. The blonde was unsure how Naruto had been able to keep his anger at bay when in constant contact with the man. She should have followed her gut when deciding how to proceed with Naruto's training. Her eyes shifted towards the boy as his face rested in the crook of her neck. She gave another gentle stroke of his hair before speaking soothingly to him. Come on. Let's go home. The boy didn't verbally respond but gave a slight tilt of the head from his position. Her eyes softened at the gesture before making a small gesture with her pinky. Nico immediately touched down beside the woman on one knee as Tsunade spoke in a quiet tone towards the woman. I'm done for the day. Any meetings I have are postponed. Get everyone out of here. Nico gave a short nod as she proceeded to leave to do her task. Though before she could leave, the Hokage stopped her with a raised palm. Jiraiya isn't to leave. Nico was quiet for several seconds before speaking. If he proceeds to leave anyway? Tsunade's eyes hardened at the question before responding. Hunt him down. Nico gave a short nod before disappearing with her ANBU squad in tow. Tsunade narrowed her eyes before gently gripping the blonde in her arms and disappearing. Why are you stopping me? Crimson eyes with 3 tomos glared with unrestrained anger into a set of cerulean orbs that shone with indifference. My mission is to bring you back to the village. Naruto stood on the head of Madara Uchiha's statue with his arms crossed. His former teammate stood atop Hashirama Senju's statue. Sasuke grit his teeth in anger before slowly exhaling. Why try to bring me back? This village has done nothing but hold me back. You of all people should know this feeling. The blonde Jinchuriki shrugged his shoulders uncaringly before responding. It doesn't matter. Auntie Tsunade tasked me with your return and I shall do so. The Uchiha sneered at the boy before lightning formed in his left hand. The sound of 1,000 birds resonating from his hand. Everything you do is for that woman. Does she even know about your feelings? The Uzumaki's stare became harsh as a Rasengan began to form in the palm of his hand. It doesn't matter. Sasuke gave a cruel grin before taunting Naruto. She'll never return your feelings. You do realize she's 3 times your age, right? A sad little boy with no one but his aunt. The boy's chakra exploded around him as a vicious glare erupted on his face. It seems like I'm going to fail my mission. You won't be coming back to Konoha alive. The raven-haired teen sneered before responding. We'll see who lives after this. The 2 teens rocketed towards one another before clashing with their jutsus. Chidori, Rasengan, dull, cerulean orbs stared at the hundreds upon hundreds of homes, buildings, and establishments that made Konoha the mighty village it was. Several people merrily conversed with one another as they went about their daily routines. Oblivious to the true dangers that lurked beyond the giant gates of the village, the people of Konoha were complacent in their lives. Confident that should trouble ever rear its face that their beloved protectors would do their jobs. Overconfidence is a slow and insidious killer. Shinobi of Konoha were often arrogant in their belief that they were the top of the food chain in the elemental nations. And they'd be correct in a sense. Konoha was powerful because it boasted powerful shinobi. Which in turn meant that should a powerful shinobi defect from their village, a serious problem would occur. Konoha was responsible for some of the worst tragedies in the elemental nations, Danzo Shimura and Orochimaru being two of the instigators for several wars, scandals, and just outright acts of terrorism in the nations. It wasn't surprising that most of the great villages, and even many minor villages, despised Konoha. Even now, Konoha was still standing atop the hierarchy of power. They possessed two of the Sannin, the Kyubi Jinchuriki, and countless feared jonins across the elemental nations. Konoha had truly been a curse in the making. Hashirama Senju and Madara Uchiha believed they could unite as one and coexist peacefully. A nice sentiment to be sure, but it was truly a foolish endeavor. Naruto had never understood the finer details in life. What was there to do other than train and grow stronger, to stand atop others and bend the world to his heel? Power was logic in this broken world. If you didn't have power, you didn't get to weigh in on your opinions and beliefs. Naruto was a pragmatic individual. He had to be. He didn't understand what happiness truly was. He couldn't rely on his emotions and was therefore forced to rely on his intelligence. Emotions caused pain and logic dictated reason. Naruto believed he was superior to everyone else because he is superior. Who would be his equal in this world? He had already toppled one of the strongest shinobi to ever come out of Konoha. Who would challenge him? Who could provide that rush of adrenaline that fueled his blood? Who? The boy never truly boasted Konoha's ideals and beliefs either, opting to dismiss the history of Konoha and its traditions. He never wore the headband on his body either. A headband that depicted your loyalty to your village was incredibly important to shinobi. It showed your love for your home. But Naruto didn't love this village, the exact opposite actually. He hated it. Despised it. If it fell tomorrow, he'd feel nothing, as if he would feel anything other than apathy or anger. In the first place, the majority of this village spit on his parents' sacrifice. He had to suffer for an action he didn't commit? Idiocy. Konoha had changed for the better under his aunt's reign, but it didn't change the overall vibe that the village gave off. Peaceful? Happiness? Joy. Naruto's head shook slightly at the thought. What was the feeling of happiness? His aunt had tried to explain it to him, but it just never truly made sense. How was he supposed to determine the value of happiness when stuck in a cesspool of self-loathing individuals who thought torturing a child was their only option for comfort? This village was the epitome of sorrow and rage. Hate and fear hid behind a facade of happiness and serenity in this village. Was Naruto loyal to Konoha? He was loyal to Tsunade. She was the Hokage, and therefore logic dictates he was loyal to Konoha. But would Naruto act on his own free will to benefit Konoha for the better? Absolutely not. He didn't kill Itachi because the man was a rogue nin of the village. He was killed because he was a direct threat to himself as well as Tsunade. The entirety of the Akatsuki were a direct threat to the both of them. Which is why he was going to crush them beneath his feet. Naruto tilted his head as a gentle breeze swept through his unruly mane of spiky hair. He acknowledged the other individual who now stood beside him just slightly out of reach but made no move to interact with them. It had been several weeks since his rather explosive reaction on his second day of returning to Konoha. He had made sure to avoid Jiraiya due to the sheer anger that would ignite from deep within him. Did Tsunade-sama inform you of the marriage contract that Suna proposed a few weeks back? Naruto slowly blinked at the question before glancing at the individual beside him. He remembered Temari and Tsunade speaking to one another but hadn't truly paid attention to the entire conversation. He did know that Temari was stressed about the overall situation though. Naruto didn't know it was about a marriage proposal, one that involved Temari of all people? Gaara would never use his sister as a political tool unless backed into a corner. Gaara must be struggling to grip his hand around the throat of Suna's counsel. He mentioned something about it when I visited Suna during my training trip. The boy placed his hands into his pockets before staring down at the village. The person beside him gave a low sigh before responding. Makes sense on why she's been so distant lately. Troublesome. Naruto glanced at Shikamaru with an eyebrow raised. You two have been courting? The lazy Nara glanced at the boy before reaching into his vest and pulling out a pack of cigarettes. The boy slowly began to tap the packet against his palm as he stared down at the village. I wouldn't say we were courting, just talking and getting to know each other. The blonde teen eyed the small packet of cigarettes with interest before speaking. You smoke now? I believed it to just be residual residue from being around Asuma all the time. The boy gave an annoyed sigh at the question as he began to unwrap the plastic surrounding the package. He slowly fished one of the sticks out of the packet before placing it in his mouth. Before he could take his lighter out of his pocket, the blonde Jinchuriki gripped the end of the cigarette and lit it with a simple application of Katon chakra. Shikamaru nodded his head in thanks before inhaling a decent amount of tobacco and slowly exhaling the substance out. Kurenai-sensei hates it. Always nagging about how it's bad for our health, as if we're not shinobi, risking our lives every day. A cigarette harming my health is the least of my worries right now. The boy gently positioned the stick on the corner of his mouth and rubbed the back of his neck. You're also changing the subject. Naruto eyed the boy out the corner of his eyes before shrugging lightly. Temari seems out of your league. The fact Gaara is her brother and is the Kazekage is another factor. Surely Auntie Tsunade has stressed the danger of what you're doing. The Nara went silent for several moments before placing his hands into his pockets. I'd never jeopardize my position in Konoha. Tsunade-sama is far stricter than the old stories about her state. But you're avoiding the overall subject again. Shikamaru glanced at Naruto with a knowing look as he blew out another plume of smoke. The blonde narrowed his eyes and shifted his position. Temari is a beautiful woman, but I am not interested. You know exactly what I'm talking about, Naruto. The boy sighed in annoyance at the statement. Suna's counsel would have disappeared had Auntie Tsunade accepted the scroll. Gaara may have changed his ways, but his people are walking a thin line. The boy's eyes met Shikamaru's before continuing. Auntie Tsunade would have me march on their soil before it came down to that. She's avoided bringing it up because it wouldn't happen. The other Kages need to realize that she won't bend the knee. The Nara nodded at the blonde's statement before rolling his neck in annoyance. Sounds like a war is coming. The blonde shrugged his shoulders before speaking. If you mean the Akatsuki, then no. A threat to all of you. An annoyance to me. Shikamaru debated on his response to that statement. The Big Five had been beefing up their military. Tsunade had been ordering all of Konoha's shinobi to step it up. She demanded nothing less than perfect, and any who opposed were stripped of their rank. If Shikamaru was being honest, it seemed like she wanted a war. IWA has been moving past its border. Skirmishes are breaking out between them and Kumo. Kiri has remained quiet due to their civil war, but apparently the revolt was successful. Shikamaru eyes his friend to gauge his reaction, and like always, the boy was relatively static. Naruto shrugged at the response with an uncaring vibe. IWA is irrelevant. Anoki is far out of his prime and isn't a threat. His two Jinchurikis loathe him as well. Should he choose to place his shinobi on Fire Country's soil, then he will lose them. Auntie Tsunade will personally mail their heads directly to him. He's an old warmonger who needs to retire. The boy rolled his neck before continuing. I recently visited Kumo. They possess an enormous amount of shinobi. It is no secret that Kumo has the largest military presence, but the Yandame Reikage is not like his father. He won't seek out confrontation with the other villages. Kumo would crush IWA, and Anoki knows this. It is why he's moving closer to Suna and Konoha. If he wishes to test the boundaries, then I will remind him why my father is feared in their nation. Shikamaru's eyes sharpened at that particular statement. Naruto was talking extremely lightly about engaging Iwa's forces on a whim. He could read between the lines of his friend's words. The blonde teen never sugarcoated his words. If IWA tried to initiate, then Naruto would step onto the field. Tsunade had complete control of Naruto as well, and the blonde Jinchuriki was a monster of a shinobi. That was made perfectly evident those few weeks back when he almost killed Jiraiya. If Tsunade wanted a war with IWA, then she would gladly send Naruto to the front lines to confront the shinobi who were pushing on Fire Country's border. The woman was positive that sending what was most likely Konoha's strongest shinobi would send a clear message that Konoha was not afraid of fighting. And of Kiri? Naruto glanced at the boy before shrugging. Jiraiya and I were requested to aid in Kiri's civil war. It isn't common knowledge because Kiri has been so silent after their revolt was a success. The new Mizukage is more concerned about fixing her nation than anything else. You would fight in a war to protect Konoha? The blonde teen scoffed at the question as he stared at his friend. To protect Konoha? I'd sooner cut off my own hand than protect this village. The blonde turned away from the Nara before stepping towards the edge of the cliff that they stood atop of. I do what Auntie Tsunade tells me to do. If what I do benefits Konoha, then so be it. But do not believe I do what I do because I care about this village. I only remain here in the first place because of her. I am not loyal to this village, and I will never be loyal to it. The Jinchuriki proceeded to step off the cliff after his statement as Shikamaru stared at the spot for several minutes. Shikamaru exhaled a large amount of smoke before throwing his cigarette away and sighing. Break, Sasori. Deidara. You both are to retrieve the Ichibi Jinchuriki from Suna. We need to push our plans ahead of schedule now. The infamous eyes of the Sage of Six Paths pierced through the darkness of Amigakura's tallest tower. Rain was pelting the enormous tower with reckless abandon as the aforementioned duo nodded before disappearing. The room was silent afterwards as the god of aim began to make his way towards the window of the tower that overlooked aim. The puppet of Yahiko surveyed the village with his Rinnegan as he contemplated how to move forward after procuring the Jinchurikis. He stood in silence before Konan made her presence known. Is it wise to push ahead of schedule? Pain remained quiet for several moments before speaking. It is necessary. The woman narrowed her eyes before responding. I didn't ask if it was necessary, Nagato. The Tendo puppet shrugged indifferently at the woman's harsh tone. It matters little. Our plan for peace is finally becoming reality. There is not a single person who can stop us from Susting. The woman's face contorted in annoyance before speaking. And Itachi's death is not enough for you to take matters into your own hands? If you haven't forgotten, we needed him. There are no Uchihas that are alive, Nagato. Her harsh tone caused the puppet to finally glance at her. Conan's mask of indifference cracked as a slight glare appeared on her face. Madara still lives. He is sufficient enough to complete Itachi's tasks. The woman exhaled a deep breath of annoyance at his statement. That man is a far cry from the real Madara, and you know this. He fools no one. Is your ego truly blinding you so much that you continue to remain ignorant to what is happening? Pain tilted his head as the woman's unique Kekai Genkai began to flood the room. The man blinked several times before slowly responding. You are adamant about this. He narrowed his eyes as he stared into the woman's unique amber pupils. The Kyubi Jinchuriki's words have truly shaken you. Conan glanced away as the thousands upon thousands of sheets of paper slowly began to coalesce into a singular shape before gently floating towards the woman and wrapping around her body. You shouldn't take his threat lightly, Uzumaki's do not lie, Nagato. Nagato was silent for several minutes as he turned his attention back to the village. You believe you can speak to him, don't you? Conan glanced away as her bloodline began to disappear into her body. He has the same eyes as you, Nagato. The puppet of Yahiko frowned at the comment and did not speak immediately. Pain slowly blinked before turning towards the woman. Are you doubting our ideal world of peace? Conan stared at the floor in silence. She knew her answer. She had known her answer for a long time, in fact. Conan was well aware of the man that Nagato had become after Yahiko's death. She had tried all she could to alleviate the pain he possessed. But she wasn't enough, she'd never be enough. Her best friend had become a shadow of himself, succumbing to the poisonous words of the man who claimed himself to be Madara Uchiha. That man was not Madara. The true Madara Uchiha would not ask others to do his deeds. He'd do them. With or without help. Madara Uchiha was renowned for his strength and power. But he was also known for his pride. And no Uchiha in the elemental nations would ever stoop so low as to ask for help in something they could easily do themselves. Tobi was incapable of procuring every single Jinchuriki by himself. He had to be. Nagato was essentially the strongest man in the elemental nations. But his broken mind state was his weakness. He was manipulated by Tobi with this idiotic plan of gathering the bijou. I see your silence is all the confirmation needed. You have lost faith in me. Conan stared at the floor for several seconds before raising her gaze to the man and nodding. You are a shell of your former self, Nagato. I tried and tried and tried to help you. You changed, you took on this persona of a god. You've slaughtered innocent people, Nagato. The woman's hands clenched into fists as her body began to shake. What happened to peace through understanding? We created the Akatsuki as a sign of hope. Look at us now, Nagato. We're criminals. We're doing exactly what Hanzo said. Pain frowned heavily at the accusation. We are making a better world, Conan. I am saving these people from suffering any further. The deaths of the Jinchurikis will create everlasting peace. This isn't what Yahiko wanted for us. Akatsuki was created to be a beacon of hope for AIM. But you subjugate the populace in fear. We hire psychopaths and scum for Kami's sake. Open your damn eyes. Tears began to fall from Conan's face as Pain watched on with a small frown. The man gazed at the ground as he contemplated the words his best friend was speaking. Had he truly changed so much? Had he truly become a tyrant in his quest for peace? Nagato felt he was justified in his quest. This world needed peace. He had been bestowed the eyes of the strongest mortal that ever existed. It was his destiny to change this world. Had Conan never truly believed in what they were doing, it didn't matter if the deeds were immoral. The end justified the means. The only thing that mattered was making sure that Yahiko's dream of peace was achieved. You are the one who is forsaking Yahiko's dream. Conan's eyes widened in shock at Nagato's words. She couldn't believe that the man would even think she would forsake the man who had given her a purpose in life. The man who gave her true hope in this broken world. The boy who had saved her from starving in a ditch on the outskirts of AIM. How dare he? The woman's face contorted into anger as her body began to peel into layers of paper. You dare accuse me of turning my back on Yahiko? Who do you think you are? We took you in. We raised you. We fed you. A tsunami of paper flooded into the room before it exploded in the tiny space, forcing the Yahiko puppet to retreat. The top of the building disintegrated as several thousand explosive tags released in the air. Pain landed on the adjacent tower of the building as he stared at the giant plume of smoke that was now rising from the building. Conan's attack had leveled the entire 30-story building and turned it into rubble and ash. The puppet glanced towards the sky as the rain began to fall faster and harder. The puppet of Yahiko frowned in confusion before staring at Conan, who was now floating directly in the sky with an expression of fury. I've stood by your side for the past 20 years. I've watched you kill people just for questioning you. Even now, you parade Yahiko around like a fucking doll. He deserves to be laid to rest. The woman's eyes narrowed before she raised both arms in the air with her palms facing the sky. Her action caused Nagato to widen his eyes in shock. Surely she wouldn't use that jutsu? I've stood by your side long enough. I won't sit by any longer and let you do as you please. If I die, then so be it. The rain began to slow in its descent as Conan's chakra spiked. The thunderclouds that surrounded the entirety of Amagakure began to part as a ray of sunshine blasted through the village. I won't let Yahiko's vision be ruined by you, Nagato. His legacy, his dreams, his ambitions. You spit on them. The sunshine that illuminated the village disappeared as clouds began to form in the sky. A heavy frown marred Nagato's face as the 6 paths of pain appeared beside the Yahiko puppet. It seemed Conan had truly made her decision. There was no redeeming her now. She was actively putting AIM in danger. Nagato would not allow it. The Deva Path slowly raised his right palm towards the woman. The Rinnegan glowed slightly as Nagato pushed his chakra through the receivers. Several seconds went by before the man frowned in confusion. What was happening? Why was the Deva Path not responding? Pain frowned as the clouds began to blanket the entire village and casting it into darkness. I've been around you long enough to know the ins and outs of your eyes. I'm well aware that I'm no match for the 6 paths of Pain, but I'm never unprepared. Pain stared at the woman for a single second before Nagato's eyes widened. If I die, then at least I die with the knowledge that I tried to make a difference for the better. Nagato grit his teeth as he stared at the paper clone of Konan who stood atop the machine that kept him alive. His body was too weak from being connected to the Geto Mazo. He had sent the 6 paths of Pain to Tendo because of the threat that Konan's jutsu proposed. It would level the entire village if he didn't stop her. The clone of Konan stared coldly at the main access pod that kept Nagato's puppets in action as both her hands pulled on the main chakra receivers that belonged to the Deva and Asura path. Those two were the true threats of the paths. The rest of the group were mainly support types. The 6 paths relied heavily on the Naraka and Asura paths when in actual combat. Negating the 2 strongest paths was her best option. Nagato glared at the clone of Konan that stood on the main pod across the room. He couldn't reach her due to his weakened state, and the other paths wouldn't be able to get back in time to stop the clone. Sweat began to fall down Konan's face as blood lightly dripped from her nose. The woman's hair flailed wildly in the air as the other paths moved to try to stop her. Several attempted throws resulted in failure due to the sheer height the woman rested at. Konan's teeth gnashed together before she closed her eyes. Pain's eyes widened as the dark sky began to physically split down the middle. The gargantuan split stretched across several miles as what could only be described as an ocean of paper tags emerging from the sky. The normally dark gray sky was nothing but pure white and expanded as far as the eye could see. The Rinnegan user stared at what was quite possibly billions upon billions of nothing but explosive paper tags. Konan raised her head towards the falling tags of paper with a tired smile. The woman slowly lowered both her arms as the ridiculous amount of tags began to descend towards the village, smothering it in pure white. I developed this jutsu in the off chance that Tobi betrayed us, but it seems you did that all on your own. Amigekure is a cursed nation, Nagato. It changed you into a monster. I can't allow it to exist any longer. There is 2 trillion explosive tags that are now dropping from the sky. It seems Deidara wasn't always drabbling on about explosions after all. The billions upon billions of paper tags were now grazing many of the towers in Amigekure. A soft smile appeared on Konan's face before she placed her palms over her heart. I'm sorry, Yahiko, Nagato screamed in frustration as the clone of Konan finally disappeared due to lack of chakra. The world seemed to freeze in place as Konan's chakra spiked one last time. The world went quiet for several seconds before Konan spoke. Kami no Shisha. Then the world went white. Break. Naruto sat underneath a waterfall in sage mode as he molded his chakra. The boy's body twitched before his head snapped in a certain direction as if sensing something. He blinked several times as he continued to stare in the direction of the anomaly for 35 straight minutes. He blinked again as the anomaly finally stopped. The boy was positive that any individual with even a hint of sensing capabilities was able to feel whatever just happened. He more than most due to being a sage. The sheer amount of chakra he sensed rivaled his own pools. It seemed to have just saturated in the air, spanning out several miles. Whoever caused that was no doubt an interesting individual. Focus, Naruto. The deep baritone voice of the QB caused the boy to snap back to reality. The boy rolled his neck to get several kinks out before nodding. That sensei of yours still holds the key to the seal. Should you relieve him of it, you will be able to balance out the difference of Yin chakra from my other half. My father still holds your Yin half. If I want to truly use the full extent of your power, I need to retrieve his soul from the Shinigami. The boy's boy went completely still as the corrosive chakra from his bijou began to encase his body. You make it seem like it is not possible to do so. I'm not saying it isn't. It just takes time. Both Bijou and Jinchuriki went silent for several minutes as each were left to their own thoughts. The bubbly corrosive chakra began to thicken before sticking to the boy's body. The chakra bled red as one of the boy's eyes turned into a harrowing shade of pure white. 4 tails flourished behind his back as a single floppy ear drooped atop his head. Half of the boy's body was now encased in what seemed like a skin-tight suit of pure crimson chakra. A red so dark that it rivaled deoxygenated blood. The water around the boy began to boil as the Tier 2 chakra cloak of the Kyuubi covered the blonde teen. The Jinchuriki sat completely still and showed no signs of struggle to control the power of his bijou. Several minutes passed by before a 5th tail sprouted behind him. The lake he sat in immediately imploded in on itself due to the sudden pressure that was released. The blonde Jinchuriki now rested in a giant crater as the once abundant lake was now reduced to a mere swimming pool for children. The blonde teen continued to remain still before sweat began to drip down his face. The boy's face began to grimace as a 6th tail emerged from his back, followed by the skeletal structure of a fox. Half of a bone skull formed on the teen's head connected to a spine that ran all the way down his back. The boy's teeth pulled back in a slight grimace as he began to struggle to control his biju's chakra. That's enough. The boy exhaled as the cloak of chakra dissipated from his body. The bones falling from his body and shattering into several dust particles before disintegrating and disappearing. The boy glanced around the clearing and noticed he now sat in a huge crater. The giant crater spanning out almost 30 meters. The boy wiped his face before jumping out the hole he created and rubbing his neck. 6 tails is still the limit. The blonde rubbed the back of his neck as he glanced in the direction of the chakra anomaly. You are only capable of accessing 6 tails because of your sage mode. It is not that you can't control more than 6 tails, it's the fact you are lacking my other half. It is causing an unbalance. The boy placed his hands into his pockets before walking towards the direction of the chakra he sensed while in sage mode. You have explained this many times, Kurama, and yet you choose to remain idle. You wish to control the entirety of my chakra but do not actively seek to do so. The blonde curled his nose in annoyance before responding. I've told you several times why I have not been able to get your other half. You would do well to ask that woman of yours for gaining access to the scroll of seals. After all, the third Hokage was the one to forbid you from reading it. The boy shook his head at the insinuation. I won't take advantage of Tsunade to further my own goals. There it is, the one thing that makes you a human. If I didn't know better, I'd say you were just another pain. The giant fox took notice at how the boy's fingers curled in his pockets. I do not hide behind delusions of grandeur, nor do I inflate my ego by calling myself God. Without his Rinnegan, he is nothing. A small smirk marred the Kyuubi's face at the boy's response. He will come for you, Naruto, and he will lose those precious eyes. Both individuals went silent as the boy continued on his trek towards the entrance of the massive gates in Konoha. It took him just over 20 minutes to reach the main stretch of the village. He ignored every single individual that recognized him as he finally came upon the massive gates. The boy slowly tilted his head up before jumping to the top of the gates and staring in the direction straight ahead of him. The boy went completely still before gaining access to his sage mode. What was the world like before Shinobi? The titanic fox didn't immediately respond to the question as the beast contemplated what it would say. It depends on what you're asking. The blonde nodded his head at the question before tilting his head. Was there more or less bloodshed? With the application of chakra, you humans became more creative in how you chose to kill. As for the amount that has been spilled in the soil, there is less bloodshed nowadays. That answer actually caused the boy to raise his eyebrows in mild surprise. Can you elaborate? The beast gave a low exhale before going silent. Naruto patiently waited for the bijou to respond. Humans have always killed one another. It is embedded in your very souls to do so. Just because you gain a better arsenal in how to dispatch your enemies does not mean the killings will necessarily rise. Before the days of Shinobi, you mortals would wage war for just about anything. Naruto tilted his head at the response before eventually nodding his head. Are you speaking objectively or subjectively? The Kyuubi scoffed at the boy's question before replying. Does it matter? The blonde acquiesced to that notion. It didn't really matter. People were going to do as they pleased regardless of what others thought. Like he was doing. He was doing as he pleased, within reason of that woman you desire. You speak too much, Kurama. The Kyuubi gave a dark chuckle before going completely silent. The boy stood to his full height as he spotted a Suna messenger desperately making their way towards the gate. The individual was pretty fast. To be expected, all messengers had to be. The blonde watched as the man was surrounded by several ANBU members before pulling out a scroll and handing it to the Kage Bunshin that the ANBU member made to read it. After several seconds, the clone nodded his head before the scroll was taken by the actual ANBU agent who disappeared. The blonde closed his eyes as his sage mode dissipated before disappearing from his spot. The world seemed to turn upside down before he opened his eyes to the sight of his aunt who was resting her head against her knuckles. His eyes roamed along her face as he took in the calm expression on her face. His eyes began to trail down from her face as his eyes subtly roamed down her body. Staring at me now? I'm flattered, Naruto. The boy's eyes snapped towards her as an amused smile adorned her beautiful face. The blonde teen blinked several times before slowly stepping into the office and ignoring the woman's statement. A scroll from Suna is approaching. The blonde made his way across the room as Tsunade's eyes trailed after him, remaining on him the entire time. The messenger was moving faster than normal. An ANBU member will be here in 32 seconds. Naruto stood in front of the wall that had the pictures of every single Hokage. His eyes roamed across each person before stopping on the third Hokage's. His face involuntarily contorted in anger before his fists clenched tightly. And how did you get here so fast? She noticed his reaction to Horizon's picture. Tsunade was well aware of the fact that he despised the man. The boy probably wasn't even aware of the action he just did. The Jinchuriki stared at the fourth Hokage's picture frame with a raised eyebrow. He was silent for several seconds before shrugging. I'm the fastest person in the village. Tsunade pursed her lips at the comment, and before she could inquire on his words an ANBU member appeared in the room while on a single knee. Tsunade stares at the agent before holding out her hand. The ANBU member handed the scroll to her before bowing. A message from Suna's council Hokage-sama. The woman didn't reply to the ANBU member as her eyes began to narrow with each line she read. She finished reading the scroll before tossing it away. She gestured for the man to leave who did so after bowing. Naruto eyed her with slight interest as her face hardened. The blonde woman was calmly drumming her fingers on the desk as a minute went by. The fifth Hokage eventually nodded her head before gesturing with her pinky. Nico dropped down beside her on a single knee awaiting instructions. Bring me Kakashi and Team Guy. Now. The purple-haired ANBU captain nodded and disappeared in a burst of speed as Naruto remained silent in the room. He slowly began to make his way towards his aunt before sitting on the corner of her desk. He closed his eyes as he sat in silence awaiting for the rest of the shinobi to be brought in. The only noise in the room was the sound of Tsunade drumming her fingers against the mahogany desk in her office. Several minutes passed by as the shinobi she called for entered through the door. Tsunade glanced at them for a few seconds before glancing towards her nephew, off. She made a slight shooing motion with her hand as the Jinchuriki sighed in annoyance. The boy proceeded to ignore the demand and laid his body on the desk. The boy's back rested against the wooden desk as Tsunade's face twisted in agitation. She shook her head ignoring the boy before staring at her shinobi. Tsunade eyed Kakashi who had a knowing look on his face. She proceeded to roll her eyes before speaking. I just received a scroll directly from Tsunade's council. Why have I called you all in? Well, it appears that the Akatsuki are finally making their move. Her words caused all the individuals to stand straighter. Her eyes found Naruto, whose eyes were now narrowed, which was a slightly amusing sight to the woman because of his position. 2 Akatsuki members attacked Suna. As you all know, Gaara is the Ichibi Jinchuriki. He has been captured and Suna is requesting our aid. I've called you all here because quite frankly, you're all I need. The woman's praise did not go unnoticed as Team Guy raised their heads in slight pride. Team Guy with the aid of Team Kakashi will complete this mission. The younger shinobi glanced at one another before nodding. Guy saluted the blonde woman as Kakashi just nodded nonchalantly. Tsunade eyed Naruto before placing her index finger on the middle of his chest. You will be leading this expedition, Naruto. The demand caused an annoyed curl of his nose before responding. Why? Because I said so? Was the immediate response. The rest of the shinobi in the room just watched on in silence as both blondes just stared directly into each other's eyes. Tenten and Lee were slightly surprised to see someone actually challenge the woman's demands. Every Konoha shinobi had learned very quickly that what the woman wanted, she got. Regardless if you liked it or not. Sure, he was the nephew of the woman, and she clearly showed favoritism, but he was openly challenging her. The Jinchuriki eventually just sighed in annoyance before closing his eyes. As you wish, Auntie Tsunade. The woman nodded with a pleased expression on her face before patting his chest. The teen rolled off the desk and stood on both his feet before facing the shinobi he would now lead. He placed his hands into his pockets and closed his eyes. You do what I say when I say it. If this is a problem, you can stay in Konoha. Because I do not need any of you to hunt down these Akatsuki members and retrieve Gaara. The boy rolled his neck slowly before continuing. We leave in 5 minutes. A tiny smirk appeared on Niji's face before he nodded and disappeared in a shunshin. The other 2 members of Team Guy gave small frowns before nodding and disappearing as well. Mike Guy gave a large grin with a thumbs up before disappearing in a burst of speed. Kakashi just shrugged before holding up a lazy peace sign and walking out of the room. Tsunade placed her arms beneath her bust and proceeded to lean back in her chair as she waited for her nephew to speak. The boy lazily shifted on his heel as he eyed the woman. For what reason should I lead them? The blonde Kage just shrugged with a small smile. Because I want to annoy you. The boy just continued to stare at her without responding. The woman tilted her head before adjusting her arms beneath her chest to draw attention to her. In doing so, it caused the boy to turn away with an annoyed sigh. They are all natural in case you're curious. I was not, but thank you for the information, Auntie Tsunade. The woman grinned in amusement before nodding her head. I made you leader because you will get the job done. Retrieving the Kazekage is obviously the main objective, but I also want the Akatsuki crushed. And who better to do so than my strongest shinobi? The woman's tone shifted at the end as she shimmied her shoulders side to side in a small dance. The blonde teen raised an eyebrow at the action before his lips slightly upturned. Tsunade grinned at the boy before gesturing for him to come closer. The boy did so with no hesitation as he stood in front of the desk. The woman sat up from her seat with a small smile. Open your hand. A gift for you and only you. The blonde teen blinked before holding his hand out. A small scroll was placed in his hands before Tsunade poked his nose. Don't open it until you get back from this mission. Understood? The boy just nodded his head before sealing the scroll away. Naruto began to turn away before Tsunade's hand gripped his wrist. The teen paused in his actions before he was pulled into a gentle embrace. The busted woman wrapped her arms around his lower back while gently squeezing him. Her head rested on his chest before she spoke in a soft tone. Be safe, Naruto. The boy blinked at the actions before he returned the woman's embrace. His arms surrounded the petite woman as his chin rested atop the woman's blonde locks. He slowly inhaled her scent before responding. I'll return unharmed. The woman didn't verbally respond, but she nodded her head from her position. The couple remained in their embrace for several moments longer than necessary before Tsunade slowly pulled away. The woman smiled at the boy before gently poking his chest. Go. You have a mission after all. The teen nodded before he began to leave the office. His hand gripped the knob of the door before Tsunade spoke quietly. I love you, Naruto. The boy paused in his action and stood motionless for several seconds. He stood still for an entire minute before he awkwardly nodded his head. You too, Auntie Tsunade. The blonde teen disappeared through the door as a small smile blossomed on her face. Despite the boy's awkward response, her glorious plan was all coming together. By her estimate, it would only take several months. A single month if she began to truly push it. Konoha was already under her heel. Intricate plans did indeed take a long time before any kind of payout was achieved. It was only a matter of time before the elemental nations followed.